What is going on out there, rotoscouts football fans? We do need an It's Terry jingle to start the show, Stephen Leibowitz. I agree with you. What's going on out there, gang? Looks like Steven's here. We've got Larry here. Sounds like Larry's going to be a little bit behind, but he's catching up. Tried to start the show a little earlier for you, Larry. 5:30, best I could do. Had a lot of work to do during the afternoon today after kind of punting on getting stuff done last night a little bit. Still got the groups column up. Got a lot of the sims that I wanted to run done last night. A lot of work done last night. Had some other stuff to do that wasn't DFS related. That's why we didn't end up on the air. It was also just another day where I was just absolutely dying. I could not, for the life of me, stop sneezing yesterday. So that was another reason I didn't just want to be on here dragging ass through the show, giving you guys, a kind of half-assed show and not a ton of value, and you have to listen to me in bad condition. It just wasn't worth it. So we popped up today instead, and I've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, so we'll go on through everything. We're going game by game, position by position, player by player through all of it. We'll talk rankings. We'll talk stacks. We'll talk, I don't know, conditions, weather, all kinds of stuff. One of the lowest totals of the year, some bad weather in a game with two really good defenses in that battle between San Francisco and Cleveland. Kind of like a lot of the San Francisco players to maybe underperform where the industry's got them. I've got them a little bit behind. Nothing I put my thumb on. Just the way that we do things around here came up a little bit behind where the industry's got them. So kind of curious about that one. Obviously some big names in that game. McCaffrey, not the least of which. He could have a great game anyway, even if it doesn't turn into an absolute shootout fantasy scoring rampage. He could have a day. Debo could have a day. But I think that's a wild card game for sure. It's going to be an interesting one to take a look at. Overall this week, kind of more limited than what we've seen. We've got a high of 49 points in that game between Arizona and LA. And then we've got a lot of games. I think the average was like 43.5 points when I was writing up the groups article last night. 47.5 point total is the next highest after that 49 point. That's the Carolina-Miami game. But Miami's favored by 14 in that. They're drawing a huge portion of those points. If Carolina doesn't hang with them, Miami's been lighting teams up anyway. But there's always the idea that they might slow things down a little bit if they're out to a 3-score lead, and it might not crack through to that kind of a total. We might get a more limited fantasy day. So we need Carolina to hang with them. The good news is that score's got them a little bit projected to do that. So hopefully we get a decent game there with that high total. After that, it drops to 45.5. And then we go all the way down. We crater at 36.5 in that San Francisco-Cleveland game. So it's a really interesting slate. Potentially some defensively oriented games. Let me see what we've also got some, a wealth of injuries to talk through. A couple more key questionables still lingering out there. I'm pulling up the weather here real quick. Just want to see what the latest is. Yeah, so we still got rain and a lot of wind in the Chicago game, the Minnesota versus Chicago game, which could be interesting in a lot of different ways. No Justin Jefferson in that one. People looking Justin Fields' direction. And then we've got a ton of bad weather in the San Francisco-Cleveland game, like I've been saying. That one's got a lot of rain and a decent amount of wind as well. So could be a couple dicey games there. Cincinnati's getting some rain in the Seattle-Cincinnati game, and that's one that I'm kind of hoping shoots out. I see a lot of passing potential in that one. So just a really interesting week to spread out through. Let's say hi to everybody. Rob F. is here. What's up, Rob? Paul Millsap's here. Great content, great channel. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. Cujo Blue. How's everyone doing? I'm doing pretty well. Having a good Saturday. Slept relatively in. Was up till normal human hour. Well, my version of normal human hours last night. And then napped for like 2 hours and then popped back up. So who knows when I sleep anymore. But doing pretty good on a rainy, ugly Saturday. I tell you who's not doing good is Joker. Joker ran outside for about 30 seconds total all day today. Just kind of runs out, takes a leak, runs back in. He does not like it when it's raining. Big hairy dog, so I can understand that. You just get a little bit of rain on him and he's wet for like 3 hours. So I can understand not liking it. But it is ugly. It's gray and pouring here all day. Jake Swales is here. What's up, Jake? So let's pull this thing up. Get my ugly mug off the screen here. Stephen Leibowitz says, that's too bad. I thought Bears-Vikes could have been a sneaky shootout, but not in weather. I tell you what, yeah, the shootout aspect of it might be a little bit more limited, especially with no Jefferson. I'm really curious to see what the downstream impact is on that Vikings passing game overall. But the thing about that game that I still do kind of like, and I was talking about this in Discord last night. I think it was with Trey. I kind of like that game still in the Justin Fields department because the Bears are without their top 3 running backs on the depth chart. The Bears are limited to Donta Foreman. The hell are the other guys? Kerry Blasingame, their fullback, and Darrington Evans, who hasn't played in the NFL this year, signed with the team this week. So they're going to be really limited with their ground game. Fields has had 2 good passing games in a row. He's obviously got tons and tons of ability with his legs in the running game. I just think with more opportunity where they're going to kind of need him to run the ball, I think, for a change. They haven't been calling a ton of designed runs for him this season overall. But with the uptick in passing output, with the connection that he's developing with DJ, even in a limited passing situation, I think there's some potential for that. And then if he's going to be taken off running a little bit, especially if people jump ship because of the weather, I kind of would maybe stay involved and am kind of still interested in that spot. So it's yet another interesting one to add to the pile on a week full of just interesting games to talk about. Let's get situated here on these notes. Got where I want it. So just looking at the board here, we're sorted, again, by player projections by FanDuel, and then just alphabetically by game as we look at it on this page. But what I added here was some of the stack rankings that we didn't have on this page previously. I should actually put a barrier here. Just a little sanity separator there. There we go. So if we want to take a quick look at that, it's also up. This is in the groups article, the stack rankings. This doesn't want to sort now? Really? My computer just went like airplane noises when I asked it to sort that column. For reasons that I don't really know. There's not exactly a ton of players here. There's like 200 and whatever. That's the conditional formatting that difficult to sort for 200? Yeah. I've been annoyed with Excel lately. I don't know why. Anyway, top ranked stack on both sites by fantasy points. No big surprise, Miami. You've got a dominant Tyreek Hill who's drawing equal to better fantasy projections than a lot of quarterbacks on the slate. You've got Jalen Waddle. Oh, I'm only on that's why it took a long time to sort. I'm only on the wide receivers and tight ends. This is going to be unsorted again, but it should sort quicker. There we go. That's why I had to grab everybody for the position by position. Anyway, as I was saying, Dolphins. Yes. Bear with me. There we go. 2 up top. Tyreek projected almost as highly as his quarterback. Mostert with A-Chain out, probably going to be drawing a pretty significant number of the carries. Jalen Waddle, the other prime target in that offense. What I really like about this offense, too, is it's 3 big weapons, especially now that we've kind of done away with the 2-headed backfield a little bit. You do have Alec Ingold coming back, but Jeff Wilson Jr. didn't make it back, so I think it's just going to be the Mostert show for the most part here. Really excited about these 3 options, and then you can kind of get little sprinklings of the other guys. I have no idea what Chase Claypool's involvement is going to be, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. But I really like the focused nature of this high-octane offense, too. It does kind of sometimes lead to a lot of shares of these guys across the entire field, but they're good for just dropping in with the big game potential that all 3 of those guys have. Top rank stack by points, 4th by DK value, 2nd by FanDuel value, top rank stack overall. Going down the board, Jacksonville, one of the more interesting teams. I mentioned it in the chat in the Discord this morning. I ran a number of sims on our pals acemind.io. Great site for simming. Friends of the site. Check them out. I was on there last night. Just FanDuel. I actually just something is screwy in my DK upload, so it wasn't running, but I think it's something on my end that I just have to figure out what I did wrong. And it was at that point I was getting a little bleary-eyed around This was after I popped back up and sat back down and did more work. So that was around 6:30 this morning. But before that, I ran a multi-sim combination of 1,000,000 FanDuel lineups. And I put them all together into an Excel file, and I sorted that by the sim ROI. There were only across it, for one thing, for people who worry in main slates about dupes, about individual ownership, across 1,000,000 lineups that I ran. And it's not perfect because it doesn't necessarily account for this guy was in the first column in this one and the second column in that one, and then they switched in another lineup, right? So it's not exactly perfect. But my point is, across 1,000,000 lineups, when I deduped it, there were 42 duplicated lineups. So let's say if you juggle those columns around, maybe it was 100 out of 1,000,000. But duplication is not an issue with these main slates, even in a 333,000 person tournament. Now, granted, that's making unique lineups, so there is a little bit of a focus toward that. But it is very easy to make unique lineups and not really worry that much about individual player ownership. You're just looking for individual combinations, differentiated combinations, but don't get too crazy with, well, this guy's 0.1% owned, so I need to have somebody like that in my lineup. Plug them in. You can get away with a lineup that's got nobody lower than like 8% owned in NFL. It's just about how those combinations come together. Anyway, long story short, way too late. Across those 1,000,000 FanDuel lineups, I sorted it by the sim ROI, and then I went to the top 10,000 lineups within the million. So the top 10,000 out of the million, 5 quarterbacks dominated 91% of the shares in that sample. Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback for the Jaguars, who we're about to talk about. Tua Tagovailoa, who we just talked about. Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow, and Joshua Dobbs. The only quarterback who didn't appear at least one time in those 10,000 lineups at the top of the million was PJ Walker. Take that for what it's worth. It's an imperfect way to do a sample that large, but it's the best way to do it that we've got currently. But what I really thought was interesting, and a guy that I'm going to have a ton of, is Trevor Lawrence. Love the spot. Projects out great this week. He's got monster weapons in Travis Etienne, Calvin Ridley. I like Christian Kirk a lot. No Zay Jones this week, but Christian Kirk will take a step forward. Evan Ingram's there. Even his downstream options are not terrible with Jamal Agnew. A little bit of talent there. So I really, really think that the Jags are going to be involved. And I think Indy's got a good chance to keep up with them. 44.5 point total. Jaguars only favored by 4. Indy's got some capability on the ground, as we saw last week with Zach Moss. We'll also see Jonathan Taylor supposedly take a step forward this week. So that's just going to be an interesting game. But for me and for the projections from the site, Jags are a premium option in terms of stacking. Second on both sites, second by value on DK, first by value on FanDuel. The Rams, like I said, Stafford was on that list of QBs, and you're going to see it. It's right here, right? Stafford, then Burrow was right there. It's no mystery why these guys come up. Goff wasn't on that list. Purdy wasn't on that list. It went down. The next guy was down here. So Dobbs sneaks in on value. Dobbs projects out pretty well. As a stack, they rank 15th on both sites, but first by value points on DK, fourth by value on FanDuel. So that's where Dobbs creeps into a lot of those shares of the top end. He was the 5th out of 5 in that share, but he was there, and he definitely sneaks in, and they're going to have to hold up their end of that game for Los Angeles to get there. Stafford's got amazing weapons with Puka, with Cooper, with Tutu, to a lesser extent Higbee and Williams, but tons of weapons for Stafford to work with. So I really like this offense, really like that offense. And then, like I just suggested, I think obviously we saw Burrow and Chase explode. Joe Burrow looked like he was fully back last week. Monster opportunities with this offense in a game that's got potential to shoot out. Only a 2.5 point game, 45.5 total. So I think Seattle can absolutely hold up their end with their passing game. Both teams have very effective running backs. The thing we've got to hope that doesn't happen in that Seattle game is that it comes out and, the weather causes both teams to focus a little bit more on the ground. A lot of handoffs, a lot of touches for Joe Mixon, a lot of handoffs for Kenneth Walker. Yeah. Losing it. I was in the middle of saying Kenny Walker, and my brain went, no, that's the guy from the Knicks that won the slam dunk contest in 1992. Kenny Skywalker. So I stopped myself from saying it. lot of names floating around in the old noggin. So anyway, this Cincinnati-Seattle game I think is very interesting. You do have Seattle's rush defense hopefully pushes more toward Cincinnati passing regardless of the conditions. First against the run so far, 3.2 yards per rush attempt for Seattle, but 21st against the pass, 6.8 yards per pass attempt. So hopefully that leans it regardless of what happens with the weather. The weather's really the only thing I think that stops that from being a pretty decent shootout. Detroit's on the board. Goff's been playing well. Amon-Ra's back. Sam Laporte is banged up, though. They do have Reynolds. They've got Jamison Williams. So they've got some pretty good options there. Montgomery's going to dominate a lot of the touches in that game, though. And Tampa Bay's pretty decent against the pass while not being great against the run. So that one's a little bit lower priority for me. They still rank 5th, though, by points. 15th by DK value. 7th by FanDuel value. A little bit better for stacking for Detroit on the FanDuel slate. Close these windows. See what's going on back over in the chat. Greg Bancone's here. Throwbacks is here. Trey's here. What's up, Trey? Was talking about the conversation we were having in Discord earlier or yesterday or whenever the hell that was. Greg Biancone says, how bad is the weather in Chicago supposed to be? According to Mr. Roth, who's the go-to, if you weren't here for baseball, we just kind of follow what Roth from over at RG says. He's the DFS weather guru. I wouldn't try and guess. I am in no way a professional meteorologist. He's got it as a orange game. Looks like a lot of rain and like 20 to 30 mile an hour winds in that game, in the Chicago game, and then lesser extent but similar weather pattern in the Cincinnati game. Beantown remembers Kenny Skywalker. He did the same dunk 4 times. It was a different era back then. You didn't have to like jump over teammates and stuff back then. You just had to be either Michael Jordan, Spud Webb, or do the same impressive dunk and make it like 4 times. Tuto Atwell, super sneaky, says Jake Swales. Yeah, that could be an interesting one. He obviously took the volume hit, but they're going to still look his way a solid handful of times. Still got that opportunity in the red zone. Greg's worried about the ceiling for Trevor Lawrence. So across those million lineups that I ran, Lawrence was the, I believe, number 1 quarterback overall by ROI. So that tells me I'm not really concerned about the ceiling. He's getting it done in across Sims with actually I left the standard deviations fairly low as well. They have if you don't have fantasy standard deviations, over at Ace Mine, they've got it set up so that you can utilize just a percentage of output as your standard deviation. And I left that fairly low. I've got him projected great. He's got a ton of good weapons. He was last week 25 of 37 for 315 yards and a touchdown. You add another touchdown to that score, and that's a pretty solid week as a passer. And it's a good enough week for the money. It's not necessarily slate breaking by any means, but that's a fairly good week. Against this same team, week 1, 24 of 32 for 241 yards and 2 touchdowns, threw an interception that game. So get me a version of last week's game with 60 more yards and an additional touchdown on top, with upside for more beyond that. I have no real issues. I know we haven't really seen the big Trevor Lawrence game, but there's definitely potential that it could come this week. I like the spot. Overall for the season, let me not do that. Let me do it this way. I know you guys can't see this. 22. His high water mark last year, 2 games with 4 touchdowns, 288 yards in one, 318 yards in another. 3 games with 3 touchdowns, 368, 321, and 262 yards. That's his true ceiling, is the 350 yards, 4 touchdown range. He's got that ability. He's got the receivers to help him do it. So I have no real issues with the ceiling for Trevor Lawrence, especially against kind of a pass funnel defense. They're 13th 3.8 yards per rush attempt, but they're 24th, 7.1 yards per pass attempt. So I kind of like the spot. Obviously, it's coming through pretty well in the projections. Coming through in the simulations. The simulations, obviously, I'm using my projections, so they're going to kind of follow, the pattern here. It's no mystery why some of these guys who were projected well in my model and well for the money end up coming up in the sims. Let me hide the DK captain pricing because we don't need that. Don't want to confuse myself further. I'm already stupid enough. Where were we? Just kind of doing the overview right now if you missed anything. So we talked Jags, we talked Rams a little bit. Like this game on both sides, as I said, both Stafford and Dobbs. And that means, again, when we're talking about the quarterback shares there, that almost entirely across those lineups, I did leave room for people because we're simming. We're trying to get to a reasonable facsimile of the contest pool. So I did leave the possibility to build lineups without stacks, but I limited it pretty aggressively. So primarily those shares where these quarterbacks are coming through as the ROI leaders, that means those stacks are as well, and that comes through obviously in these stack rankings. The Rams third by points on both sides, third by value on FanDuel, seventh by value on DK. Joe Burrow and his Bengals passing attack here, fourth on both sides, sixth and fifth by value. This is where you're getting into an interesting one with Detroit, with their 15th rank. They're a little bit pricey. Part of that's Montgomery, drives up the price, and that's always going to be a thing with how we do the stack rankings, right? Some of these teams don't have an expensive running back who's included in the stack ranking, and Detroit does. So you could easily bring that total cost of the stack down if I had gone like this and used $4,500 from Josh Reynolds instead of $7,300 in that price from David Montgomery. They would be one of the top-ranked value teams. But it would be unfair to do it that way because Montgomery's the much more involved guy. He's involved in the passing game. He's far more relevant than Josh Reynolds is. Josh Reynolds will be involved, don't get me wrong. But the most relevant guy to the stack and the fair way to do the stack was with these four. So that's kind of where my judgment comes in with those stack rankings, because I do include the running backs that are not necessarily bell cow ground game only type running backs, but running backs who are the featured touch guy, let's say, who are involved in the passing game, and Montgomery certainly qualifies. No Jahmyr Gibbs again this week. San Francisco, I talked about a little bit, going up against a really good Cleveland D. Second against the pass, second against the run in terms of yards per attempt, 3.2, 4.7. That Cleveland D is no joke. They're good. McCaffrey's obviously a monster weapon. Debo's a monster weapon. Ayuk is very good. George Kittle's a weapon. Brock Purdy's been playing really well. But between the defenses, the conditions in this game, the lack of much expectation for the opponent to do anything at all, I don't love this game for San Fran. Vegas and New England, I kind of hate this game. 41-point total, 2.5-point spread. New England has scored 18 points in the last 3 games. New England, I noted it. I don't remember the total. Do I have it here? Hang on one second. I think it's 18 to... As a team, over the last 3 weeks, the Patriots, as I said, have 18 points. They've been outscored by DJ Moore himself over those 3 weeks. DJ Moore has 30 points total over those 3 weeks. So that's good. So the Patriots probably not going to hold up their end of the bargain. They're a pretty decent defense, though, to throw at this Vegas team that's, Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs are stars. Jimmy is a game manager of a quarterback, and they don't really have much else. I do like Jacoby Myers. I think he's a decent receiver for the price, and they've been looking his direction. But in a limited game with a good defense going up against this, I don't want to call Jimmy a bad quarterback, but a limited quarterback, a non-star quarterback. I don't love this spot for the Raiders, especially when I think they get up by 2 or 3 scores. They're not going to really have their foot on the gas. They'll just hand off to Jacobs and kill the clock. New England, I really don't think holds up their end and hangs with this team. Quiet, Joker. He's obviously excited about it. Tampa on the other side of the Detroit game. Baker Mayfield's playing all right. He's obviously got weapons in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I do like the combination there. I like the ability to, if I'm going to Detroit, have a reasonable run back in either Evans or Godwin. Anytime I can get even from a bad team, if I have a star caliber play as a bring back type play against the stack, I'm perfectly happy to go there. And I will have some Detroit. I'll have less Tampa Bay. But Evans and Godwin at worst are good mixing guys. Let them fall wherever they may in other lineups. And they're good bring back guys. That's kind of how I view Tampa Bay. They're also going up against a Detroit defense that's pretty good. 3rd against the run, 6th against the pass. Philly is another one. Only a 41-point total in that game. They're favored by 6.5, but they're going up against a decent Jets defense. 11th against the pass, 6.1 yards per attempt. They're 25th against the run, 4.5 yards per attempt. But they've just been on the field so much. I think that their talent is better than their output has been this year. And the 41-point total, I think, kind of agrees with that. Obviously, some of that is from Zach Wilson. Probably not going to hold up his end. The Jets not going to hold up their end overall. I do like Breece Hall on that side. I still will get to some shares of Jalen Hurts. But overall, 9th by points, 22nd by value. 9th by points, 20th by value. So the Eagles are expensive and may not do a ton of scoring. So I'm kind of a little bit, not off the Eagles, but a little bit more hesitant to get really excited about them. I also think that it's a situation where with all three of these guys being really good, it makes it a little bit more difficult in a game where it's going to be, I think, limited scoring to say, all right, Jalen +2 is difficult to get to, especially when Jalen's got some touchdown equity of his own to run the ball in. Jalen +1, now I don't know which one it is. It just becomes a more difficult situation to roster for price. So I'll have some Eagles, but it's not my favorite stack of the week. Not a priority stack for me. Like the skill players better for New Orleans. Love Kamara, Olave, Thomas, all very good skill players. Carr was able to throw the ball downfield a little bit last time out. Chill, Joker. He went 7 yards per pass attempt week 5. 3 targets over 20 yards, which was similar to the pre-injury to his shoulder. So hopefully he's over whatever that issue was and able to throw the ball downfield. But it's more just grab skill players spot for me than it is to really load up on stacks. Not that Houston's defense is intimidating, middling kind of a defense. This one's the interesting one on the other side of that Chicago game. Just Kirk Cousins, what's he going to do without Justin Jefferson out there now? They've got Madison and Cam Akers splitting the carries. They've got Hawkinson still as a prime target, probably their best receiving option now, the tight end. And then they've got Addison, the rookie, and KJ Osborne. It's been kind of limited. They're definitely going up against a good opportunity to throw the ball. Chicago 31st, 8 yards per pass attempt. There's plenty of air there, but no Jefferson really hurts that. I like Kirk Cousins too. I think he's a good quarterback. Just difficult to go to him with this group of receivers. That said, if it is something where it limits the public's interest in that spot, I'll probably take a few shots. I do think that Hawkinson, Addison, Osborne are at least reasonable bring back options on the other side of like a naked Fields or a Fields DJ Moore. Something along those lines. Seattle, I kind of talked about in terms of the Cincy game, the Cincy side. They look pretty similar. I prefer Cincy. I think Burrow's the better quarterback between Geno and him. I'm not breaking any new ground there. But Geno's got very strong weapons with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and a very good running back in Kenny Walker. Jackson Smith and Jigba has been capable, but works primarily around the line of scrimmage. Just no ADOT to speak of. So I don't love him for fantasy purposes. It's really these two guys. And then Kenny Walker in terms of fantasy options here. They are going up against the defense, 30th ranked, 5.3 yards per rush attempt. So it could just be Kenny Walker day. And that kind of feeds into the, all right, if it is ugly out there, maybe Seattle doesn't throw as much. It's kind of the opposite situation from what we looked at with Seattle having a decent rush D, maybe even with bad conditions, keeps it in the air a little bit. And they've got Jake Bobo. Jake Bobo had his day in the sun that, week 4 showdown game? Don't think he did anything. He scored his touchdown week 3, I think. If I remember correctly. It's in the notes somewhere. Atlanta, I don't love it. Des Ridder took a little bit of a step forward last week. This is another spot I just kind of greatly prefer the skill players. Bijan let us down, and I had a big share of Bijan last week. Bijan and Michael Wilson were the two killers for me last week. Otherwise, it would have been a really good week. It's a good week, but it would have been a really good week otherwise. But Bijan, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, I still like all three of those options. Algier, I worry about the volume. It came back and stole a bunch of carries last week, and he's going to keep on doing that. And if those carries come in the red zone, if he ends up picking up the touchdowns, it definitely bites into Bijan. And it probably has a little bit of, at least, of an impact on Bijan's just weekly ceiling outside of just explosive plays. So there is that factor when you go here. And then you've got limitations on the two pass catchers because of their quarterback not being all that good. They've got Van Jefferson on this team now. I don't really expect much, but it probably bites into whatever Mac Hollins was doing. Jonnu Smith bites into what Kyle Pitts does. They've got two guys for every position, basically, which is kind of annoying. Fields way down here when we're ranked by stack value, 14th on both sites, but 10th by value on DK, 18th by value on FanDuel. Very different option across sites. FanDuel's got him priced at 85, where DK's got him priced at 73. Has a little bit of impact. And then FanDuel's got DJ Moore all the way up at 8,000, which has a big impact. As I said, you've got the Donta Foreman, Darrington Evans, Kerry Blasingame backfield is going to be really limited on the ground for Chicago. Through the air, Moore's a great option. Cole Kmet is their clear number 2 at the tight end position, and a pretty decent tight end in terms of where he's priced, what his opportunity should look like. Darnell Mooney, Tyler Scott. Scott should probably take a step forward. Little bit of an opportunity, but I don't love the passing game outside of the Moore and Kmet portion of that, and I can roster Fields on his own. I don't mind Justin Fields' naked stacks, as they say. Josh Dobbs, like I talked about, he was the 5th out of those 5 top quarterbacks across those sims. Like him to work with some Marquise Brown, some Zach Ertz, a little bit of Rondale, a little bit of Michael Wilson maybe, hopefully this week. He's got some options, and he's got some cheap options. So that's why they pop up in value. 1st on DK point per dollar, 4th on FanDuel point per dollar. Dobbs is not expensive himself, 5,200, 6,700 across sites. Hollywood, 53, 7,000, the most expensive part of this team on the FanDuel slate. It's a little weird. No Connor for this team, for Arizona. They'll be dealing with Amari Mercado. Keontae Ingram on the ground. Ingram's listed 1st on the depth chart. We'll talk about this as well. But DeMarcado is everybody's in the industry, everybody's favorite option here. The fantasy industry doesn't drive what this team's going to do, though. We talked about that with, I forget what, just everybody hoping and praying that, an option was going to break some way doesn't necessarily make it so. So that's the concern there. It could just be, a day where they give the ball to Keontae Ingram for reasons. That said, Amari DeMarcado did have a pretty solid snap share in the second half last week. CJ Stroud playing really well, like his primary option in Nico Collins. No Tank Dell this week. Tank Dell was ruled out with a concussion and then was ruled back into questionable status. Doesn't seem like he's going to play. I think that's just gamesmanship. Robert Woods is getting targets in the red zone. He's getting targets overall. Hasn't done a ton, but he projects out all right, and he projects out fairly well for the money. This team ranks 3rd on the DK slate by points per dollar. 16th overall by points, but 3rd by point per dollar. 11th on the FanDuel point per dollar scale. Dalton Schultz, a very good option for tight end touchdowns for cheap. 3,600, 5,200. He's been involved in the red zone for that team. Downboard, Washington and Atlanta. Sam Howell, Brian Robinson, Terry McLaurin. I like the 3 receivers, actually, that he's got to work with. McLaurin, Dotson, and Samuel. I just don't like Howell that much. Brian Robinson, I think, is a fairly talented back. But they're going up against an Atlanta defense that's been fairly decent. I don't really love the Washington stack. 42.5 point total. 2.5 point spread is good. Competitive game. I could see it turning into a little bit of an aerial battle if Ritter can hold his own. But it's not a great game overall. A lot of skill players. So it's probably another one where I'll take my shares of McLaurin and Dotson and Bijan from the other side and Drake London from the other side, but maybe not build that many stacks. Gardner Minshew. Everybody wants to talk about Gardner Minshew. I don't love the option. He is going up against the defense that is allowing 7.2 yards per pass attempt, 26th ranked. 10th ranked on the ground, so presumably they'll be throwing. Presumably, if Jacksonville goes off like we expect them to, he's going to have to do his thing to keep them in the game. Has had good, effective fantasy games. Has had good, effective NFL games. I don't know. Taylor, like I said, going to pick up more carries. Probably more of a true split this week with Zach Moss. A lot of coach speak going that direction, but also a lot of coach speak with saying, well, they both are playing really well, and I want to get them both the ball. So maybe that just limits the pass volume overall, and they make it a ground-focused game. I can't imagine that. But there are two pretty decent options on the ground for them. And they've got Pittman in the passing game. Downs is all right. Alec Pierce is all right. They get looks. They can produce. But really, Pittman is the prime option here. The tight ends, it's kind of similar. Granson and Ogletree, kind of limited tight end options. Breece Hall all day on the Jets side of things. We saw the breakout last week. We were calling for it. The coaches were saying he was going to get more volume, be totally unleashed. And he was, and it was a nice asset to have for fantasy. I truly don't care how popular he is. For 6,000, 6,800, I'll just go there. Philly stout against the run, 3.4 yards per rush attempt, ranks 4th. Pretty good against the pass, 12th ranked against the pass. I think they're just going to focus on, trying to box in Breece Hall, but I think he's talented enough that I don't really mind it. So I think he can get away with it, and if he ends up a little bit lower owned than he should be for all the volume that I expect him to see, I think there's opportunity there. Zach played a little bit better against Kansas City. He was all right last week, but come on. It's limited at Zach Wilson. Garrett Wilson is limited by Zach Wilson. Alan Lazard also limited by Zach Wilson. Tyler Conklin gets looks. He's a marginally playable tight end. Dalvin, no. The rest of these guys pretty much on the no list. New England pretty much all on the no list. Ramonde has been awful this year. Mac Jones has been pretty bad outside of weeks 1 and 2. Devontae, Kendrick Bourne, it's just a really limited team. Carolina going up against Miami. Like I said, they do have to hold their own for Miami to get there. Probably a better source for some bringbacks. Jonathan Mingo is coming up a fair amount in terms of being projected all right and coming in at a very low price, $3,500, $4,900. Interesting value receiver there. Carolina does rank 12th by point per dollar value, 21st by points on DK, but 12th by point per dollar. 21st and 21st on FanDuel, thankfully. 6,000 for DJ Shark, 7,400 for Adam Thielen would have a decent amount to do with that. The quarterback's not expensive. He hasn't really been good. And they're dealing with Chuba Hubbard focus in the backfield because no Miles Sanders this week. Bottom of the board, PJ Walker, like I said, out of 1 million lineups, sorted into the top 10,000 lineups by ROI. PJ Walker did not appear once in a FanDuel sim. Would he get there in DK? Probably. That is a key distinction. 4,000 for a quarterback on DK probably gets him there at least a few times in that sim. I didn't run DK sims, couldn't get it up and running through no fault of Ace Mine's, probably my own. Sure, I screwed something up in the upload. But yeah, Walker is not really an option on the FanDuel slate, and you're running him into a good defense in terrible conditions. We already talked a couple times about the conditions in that San Francisco-Cleveland game. It's just a bad, bad spot to grab PJ Walker. And what's he working with? Amari Cooper's good. Who else is good? Jerome Ford? Kareem Hunt? Moore? Njoku? Peoples-Jones? I mean, it's a garbage offense. I like their defense. I really think this total's accurate, this 36.5 point total. Cleveland are 10-point dogs at home. I think their defense might keep them in it. Might turn into a bit of a weather, ugly game, slugfest kind of thing. I just really want to stay away from undercut San Francisco for me and then stay away from the Cleveland side. Stephen Leawood says, Patriots elevated a lot of offensive skill players, and while I don't expect much, there could be some fuckery about who gets snaps. What are the... I can see about that. Why did I go away from this? So yeah, they've got Juju's out, Demario Douglas is out, Tyquan Thornton is questionable, Keishon Boutte, Jalen Reagor, and Matthew Slater, I assume are the guys you're talking about, along with Devontae Parker and Kendrick Bourne. We can talk about them. Steven says Malik Cunningham, Reagor, and Thornton active. Okay, Malik Cunningham I didn't have on this list. Malik Cunningham is a backup quarterback, so we're not going to worry about him. Okay, it's saying that it's possible he could see some snaps at wide receiver and on special teams. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to sweat that one that much. Even if he gets out there, what are we talking about? A couple of snaps, a couple of routes as probably just a decoy, as a gimmick play. So I'm not really worried about that one. The guys like Boutte, Jalen Reagor, who were on the depth chart at least. Maybe. Kayshon Boutte played 53 snaps with the offense in week 1. Saw 4 targets. Caught exactly none of them. Ran 40 routes. Then didn't play each of the last 4 weeks. I would expect him to probably be that next man up, just given that he did that. What's Reagor's activity? Yeah, Reagor hasn't played for them. Called up for week 2, but didn't see any snaps. Yeah, I mean, even with the idea that there's options there, and who knows where that makes it even less appealing rather than more appealing, I think. Yeah, Steven say I don't expect him to make an impact. Yeah, I think that just makes it a little bit more cloudy, if nothing else, for an offense that I already didn't really want to go to. And we still got Mac Jones as the one who has to deliver them the ball. Jake says, Sauce ate that chopped cheese on a honey bun the fuck away, and now he has a hurt tummy. Yeah, I know Sauce is out. It could absolutely have an impact. I don't drive it through individual players, though. It's driven through Vegas. And the way that Vegas sees it, it's not really coming up in Philly's favor. I mean, it's coming up in Philly's favor, but it's not really coming up as a massive fantasy game in Philly's favor. Let's get into some of the game by game. First one up, we're going in alphabetical order by these games as usual, so ignore if you're reading this anywhere else, probably it's done in order of schedule. Around here, we just alphabetize this list of games and go through it. 49 points, the biggest total of the week. 7-point spread in Los Angeles with Arizona visiting. It's an interesting spot, like we talked about. Dobbs and Stafford both landing on that list of premium options at quarterback. Both teams showing good value ratings. 15th ranked for Arizona, 3rd ranked for Los Angeles in terms of points, but both teams top groups of value. Both teams not great on defense. The best mark is the 6.3 yards per pass attempt that Los Angeles has limited others to. That's 14th ranked. So a middling pass defense there. Kind of a weak rush defense and then weak defense on both sides. A lot of support for the idea that this will be a high-scoring game. Let me just set it up all across the board here. Too many things to organize. Can't get it all on one screen. Too many things to talk about. Dobbs, 27th by yards per pass attempt is not exactly ideal, but seems, just to me, it seems like he's better than that. 6.3 yards per pass attempt. I don't know what it is. It feels like he's been producing more. He's thrown 6 touchdowns, only two interceptions on the season, 196 yards a game, 20 of 31 per game in his 5 games. Just 4.2 air yards per attempt, 4.7 air yards per attempt for Stafford on the other side, but attempting downfield throws, 8.3 intended air yards versus 8.6. Plenty of looks down the field. Throwing the ball a decent amount of the time in the red zone, 19 red zone attempts so far. He's run the ball in once. He's got 142 rush yards, 5.4 attempts per game, 5.3 yards per attempt. He's been good. He's been good for fantasy. Overall, Ranks QB 7 on both sites. QB 1 by value, point per dollar value on DK. 3 by point per dollar on FanDuel. I like the spot. I really do. He's very cheap. Stafford, QB 5 and 3 on DK. 5 and 5 on the FanDuel slate. A lot easier to support this one. Going up against a pass defense that's allowing 251 yards a game. Eight touchdowns. 7.3 yard defensive ADOT. Gaining pressure. By the way, neither of these teams really gaining a ton of pressure. It's 18.4% pressure for Los Angeles, 16.3% for Arizona. There's not a ton to worry about in terms of that. Stafford throwing the ball 40 times a game. Gotta love the pass volume. 290 yards, 5 touchdowns on the season. 5 interceptions also. 8.6 intended air yards per attempt. 7.1 yards per pass attempt. And he got his best weapon back last week. Gotta love the opportunity. Overall, 4th in passing yards this year, but only the 5 touchdown passes. They've kind of been red zone, rush focused in the red zone a little bit, but I expect that to change with Cooper Kupp back, with just, the dynamic nature of this offense. Kupp. Jump over to that. Well, let me keep going in order. I got excited to talk about Cooper Kupp when I said his name. On the ground. Oh, these notes are a mess already. On the ground. Like we talked about, no James Conner. Let's start there. DeMercado projects out as the better guy. I put him as the lead back. Like I was saying, on the depth chart, according to the team, Keaontay Ingram is the lead back. But everybody seems to want to have DeMercado in that. I might change this up. He's listed second on the depth chart. Last week, 10 carries, 45 yards, and a touchdown on 44 snaps with the offense. Had 100% of the second half snaps after Connor left, but Ingram wasn't active. So we take that with a grain of salt. He saw 3 targets, caught 1 of them. In week 4 with Connor active, 24 snaps, targeted 4 times, 3 catches, but only had 1 carry. And he's undrafted. So it's not like they've got a ton invested into Mercado where they have to see what he's worth, have to see if he's the real thing. I do think he's involved. I do think he sees a fair amount of carries. Ingram DMP the last 2 weeks. 12 carries over the first 3 weeks of the season for 15 total rushing yards. Another 8 on his 1 target and 1 catch of the season, which came in week 3. In 2022, he carried the ball 27 times for 60 yards total and 1 touchdown, 4 of 5 for 21 yards through the air for the season. That's it. That's all the book we've got on Keaontay Ingram. Really limited options here on the ground. Do think either one of them could have an okay day. They're both very cheap. They're playable, but they're not great options, especially when we don't know where the ball's going necessarily. As Stephen Leibowitz points out, which I would get to in the Rondale Moore section, he carried the ball 3 times for 50 yards last week, and he had 3 carries for 54 yards in week 3 as well. So he's a little bit involved in the ground game there, which could, with the primary back out and with some kind of big question marks there, could have an impact. They also picked Tony Jones up off of waivers, but I don't expect much there. I can't imagine he becomes the focus here. Kyron Williams is a volume monster. 19 touches, 87 yards on average the last couple of weeks. Overall, first in running back snaps. Pretty limited in a lot of like the advanced running back stuff or like any of the elusiveness. Yards before contact, 2.4, 1.4 yards after contact. Only 1 broken tackle all season. Not a big explosive runner, just a ton of volume. 15.4 carries a game, but just 3.9 yards per rush attempt. 5 rushing touchdowns so far. Plenty of rushing carries in the red zone. A little bit of involvement in the passing game. 4.8 targets per game. 2.6 catches. He's got a receiving touchdown on the season. You can't really argue with the production for fantasy so far. He's not crazy expensive on DK. Let me zero that out. DK at 65, not crazy expensive. Should come up a pretty decent amount of the time as a value running back. 82 on the FanDuel slate was still actually coming up a decent amount of time in a lot of the sims that I ran. He's involved this week. I don't love the price, and I prefer the passing game, but just given the volume, given the looks in the red zone, the opportunity to punch the ball in for a touchdown, I definitely think he's on the board for shares at worst. Ronnie Rivers last week had 1 carry for 1 yard, 0 targets. Would not involve him. On the wideout side, Hollywood dealing with a Q tag. I expect him to play. He had 10 targets in 3 of the last 4 weeks. Had 6 catches, 7 catches, and 4 catches in those games. Basically 25 to 30% targeted when he runs a route. He's out there running routes constantly. 91% of the snaps last week, ran routes on 62% of those. On average, he's running routes on 56% of his 92% of the snaps. So essentially half the plays they run, he's running a route. And he's targeted about 30% of the time on those. It amounts to 8 targets a game at 27.8% share. Zach Ertz draws 7 targets a game. He's arguably the strong number 2 option in the passing attack. Ran 30 routes in week 5. Only saw 4 targets. 2 of 4 for 10 yards. But he got in the end zone. When we get to the tight end position, a lot of these guys, it just becomes, did you get in the end zone? It's all I really need with a lot of these tight ends. Ertz, not the cheapest tight end option on the board, but not the most expensive. $3,600 on the DK slate is actually pretty cheap. $52 on the FanDuel slate, easy enough to get to. Pretty solid, like middle of the board value tight end. I don't mind that at all. 75% of the snaps last week, see 71% on average. Ran routes on 70% of those snaps. Targeted on just 13%. Like I said, it amounted to, what did I say? 4 targets. But he scored, as long as he gets in the end zone. Michael Wilson had a ton of them last week, had picked them up on waivers for season long, and totally disappointed. 2 targets in week 5. Caught one of them, 18 yards. Came toward the end of the game. Was carrying a 0 for most of the game last week. Really, really sucked when I had him in my lead lineup for the day. Saw 7 targets in week 4. That was the big step forward that made him a valuable pickup, that made him kind of a popular option last week in this offense. He caught all 7 of them, put up 76 yards and 2 touchdowns that week. Those are his only 2 scores of the year. That was the most involved he's been. I really don't know what to expect from Michael Wilson, given when we thought he was going to take a big step forward, he didn't really get targeted. He was still out there 75% of the snaps. He saw more snaps than Rondale Moore. Saw more targets on the snaps that he saw. 19% targets per route run. Moore ran 29 routes, targeted 5 times, 3 catches, 26 yards. Had the 3 carries for another 50 yards. In week 4, in Wilson's breakout week, he only had 2 targets. He had 6 targets in week 3, had 4 catches, but just 8 yards. 3 carries for 54 yards that week. Once we get past Hollywood and Ertz, it becomes a little bit questionable with these 2 guys where the ball's going. And really, I only want the guy that the ball's going to for volume. I don't really want to trust either one of these guys in terms of break me off a big play. You do have a pretty solid 13.5 yard ADOT from Michael Wilson. He's putting up 14.17 yards per target. But really, I just want to get some volume here. So I don't love the downstream options for Dobbs. But across stacks, you can definitely have shares of both of these guys. You can have shares of just, Dobbs +1 with either one of these guys. The way I like him even better, though, is Dobbs +2 with one of these guys and one of these guys. I think that's just an easy way to go about building Arizona stacks. Zach Pascal ran 5 routes, was targeted once in week 5. Week 4, he had 10 routes and 4 targets. That was by far the high point of his season. He had 3 catches for 10 yards that week. I think we can kind of skip Zach Pascal. Trey McBride doesn't really get involved. Hasn't run more than 11 routes that he ran in week 2 all season. That was the only time he's run more than 10 routes. He's targeted 3 times last week, 2 of 3 for 17 yards, only 1 red zone target all season. If he happens to get the red zone look, happens to score, it becomes a disaster for Zach Ertz ownership, but they have not been looking his direction at all. Did I miss anybody? Greg Dortch, 1 route each of the last 2 weeks. Special teamer. Jeff Swaim, 6 routes, 2 targets. 1 target in the red zone in week 5. That's a plus. 2 catches for 22 yards. I don't think he's overly fantasy relevant as a $2,500 bottom of the barrel tight end. And then the passing game that everybody's going to have. Cooper, 12 targets, 37 routes, 8 of 12 for 118 yards. Didn't score. Great matchup. This is the same team that Jamar Chase put his monster up against last week. Tons and tons of upside for Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford to just connect and connect and connect and go off in this one. But you've got Puka there. He also had a good game. 38 routes, was targeted 11 times, caught 7 of 11 for 71 yards and a touchdown. That was actually the 11 targets were one more target than he saw in week 4 when he ran 4 additional routes. So even with Cooper Kupp coming back, he actually picked up a target. He ran 4 fewer routes, but I don't think that's because of Kupp necessarily, and he picked up a target. Tutu ran 37 routes, but only saw 5 targets. He had seen 9 targets in each of 3 straight weeks before that, had 8 targets in week 1. He caught just 2 passes for 9 yards last week, but he got in the end zone, which saves the day. He's down to 5,100, 5,500. If they look his direction 5 times again, you can absolutely get value out of Tutu Atwell. I would expect a couple more catches, a little bit more yardage, and then you've got the wild card of does he or doesn't he get in the end zone. Projects out better for catches on, based on the catches on DK than he does on the FanDuel board. I like him for price on DK at 51. Whoever said that earlier, I think that is a interesting spot. Eliza Ledesma, says Fields might go off again. I'm kind of in on the Fields play this week, especially if he gets lower owned. And I think he's going to be running a lot. Yeah, Trey says it right there. Just with that banged up rushing attack, I think he's going to be moving the ball on the ground. It's the weather concerns me in that game, but really nothing else in terms of Justin Fields. And I love the step forward he's taken the last 2 weeks. He's back to being effective Fields, hopefully. Trey says, I feel like Hurts will get 23-ish in that range, and one of A.J. Brown, Devonta will get there. Swift 15-plus last 4, sub 10% from what I see, and correlates with Hurts and Devonta will be low-owned. Yeah, look, there's plenty of reasons to go to the Eagles. They just don't happen to project all that well, and they're pretty expensive in my model with a bunch of other spots that I like against defenses that, not necessarily as good as the Jets. Sauce or no sauce, Jets defense is decent at least. So there's just spots I like better, but I'm not saying there's zero chance that Hurts comes out, has a monster, AJ has a monster. I even could see around a path to Hurts +2 with, Hurts, AJ, and Devonta, or Hurts, AJ, and Swift going off. It's the Jets. I mean, it's not exactly world beaters overall. That defense is going to be on the field a hell of a lot. Just on opportunity alone, they could score a good number of fantasy points. And then if you get that day where it's just, all right, the Eagles only scored 3 touchdowns, but the Hurts to AJ combination came through all 3 times. Or worse, like Hurts to Dallas Goedert. So Hurts got his. Maybe he runs one in also, so he comes up with 4 touchdowns, and all 3 passes go to Dallas Goedert. Like, that's taking you in a different direction, obviously, where the Eagles perform. They put up points on the Jets. They put up fantasy points, but it doesn't necessarily go in the direction you're looking for. So just not my favorite overall spot. But I'll have some. Hurts is too good to not play any. Where were we? So we talked about the 3 wideouts. Skoranek, super limited. Demarcus Robinson didn't play in week 5, ran 2 routes in week 4, just completely not relevant. They did send Van Jefferson out to Atlanta, so maybe one of those 2 guys sees a couple more looks between Skoranek and Demarcus, but I don't think we're playing either one of those guys. They don't project well, even for the money. You're talking about really, really thin options. Higbee, solid tight end option, ran 34 routes in week 5, only saw 3 targets, 2 of 3 for 20 yards. 38 routes in week 4, saw 11 targets, went 5 of 11 for 64 yards. He's only seen 2 red zone targets this year, but again, they've kind of been running the ball a decent amount in the red zone. Stafford only with 5 touchdown passes overall. I think once they start throwing the ball, when they get in close a little bit, he picks up a few additional looks, and we could have a decent Tyler Higbee week. Definitely a game I'm going to be invested in on both sides. Carolina and Miami. Taking care of a lot of the high scoring up top. Show's going to slow down in the second half. Kind of like this Miami game might. Oh, what a dynamite transition. How about that? Tua, a monster. Tyreek, a monster. Jalen Waddle, pretty damn good. Raheem Mostert, pretty damn good. The Dolphins defense, a potential option. 3,500, 4,800. They haven't been good. 28th by yards per rush attempt, 18th by yards per pass attempt. But going up against this Carolina offense, could be some opportunity. Pick off a couple Bryce Young passes,
get to him a couple times. Could be an opportunity for the Dolphins to at least have a score that's a handful of locked in points, even if the Panthers manage to score a couple times. Panthers side of things, they're going to have to hold up their end, as I've said a few times already, but they're not going up against a good D. Bryce Young, minor flashes, let's say. Adam Thielen's having a very good year. One of the top-ranked overall fantasy wideouts so far. DJ Shark, Jonathan Mingo, value-ish type options. Chuba Hubbard, a value running back. So there's plays on the Carolina side. I just don't love them. Miami's going to probably drive the pace in this game. They're super fast-paced. They're obviously pretty pass-focused. Carolina's more plotting. Bryce Young last in yards per attempt. Last week, 25 of 41 for 247 yards, 3 touchdowns. That was his best game overall. Threw 2 picks still. So that's the kind of game I'm looking for if I do go to the Miami D. Even if he gives up the 3, let's say they get the 2 picks, they pick up a handful of sacks. We're okay. It's not a great score. Obviously, we're looking for the defensive touchdown. We're looking for the blocks, so on and so forth. But I don't think they're off the board by any means going up against a bad team. Anytime we've got even a middling defense going up against a bad team, I'll take that option. Especially a bad team that's using their nominal, anyway, second string running back. Not that Chuba Hubbard hasn't seen snaps, but I am worried about Carolina coming through for us on their side. Tua, first in the league by yards per attempt, first in yards per game. If anybody cares, Logan Paul defeat Dylan Dennis by disqualification. Don't know why I'm getting boxing alerts in this day and age. Used to love boxing. Haven't watched it in a while. Still not an MMA guy, as I've talked about a bunch of times, but I've gotten away from following boxing all that regularly. Once the YouTubers came in, started becoming the featured act. Last week, Tua went 22 of 30, 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, threw 2 picks to the bad Giants, but it's Tua. 3 of his 5 games this season, he's been over 300 yards. 3 of 5 games this season, he's got more than 1 touchdown pass. He's got some of the best weapons in the league to work with. He ranks first overall on both sites by fantasy points. First at the quarterback position, and I believe first overall on both sites by fantasy points. 5th on DK by value, 1st on FanDuel by value at the position. He is facing a defense that gets a decent amount of pressure. I'm really not that concerned. I think he's got plenty of capability to get the ball out on time. He's got receivers who should be dominating in the secondary. He's thrown 11 touchdown passes, averaging 322 yards a game, completing 72% of his 33 passes a game, 7.4 intended air yards per attempt, completing 9.7 yards per attempt, 5.3 air yards per attempt. Just an absolute beast of a quarterback right now. Neither one of these guys are really going to be a threat to run the ball. So we're just looking for passing out of these two. Obviously, 2 is the monster favorite. 10 points up on both sites on the rookie. Chuba, 48% of the snaps last week. On average, 42% of the snaps. 7 rushes a game. He's been involved even when Miles Sanders is there. Seeing 2.8 targets, 2.4 catches. So call it 9-10 touches overall on a game. Last week, 31 snaps, had 9 carries for 35 yards. Week before, 14 carries for 41 yards on 37 snaps. 2 targets each week. He saw 5 red zone carries in week 4. Now the focal point of the offense. Or of the rushing attack anyway. He's got that going for him. Raheem Blackshear saw 9 special team snaps in week 1, and that is it for the year. On the Miami side, Alec Ingold coming back, but Jeff Wilson not making it back. No A-Chain. I think it's the Mostert show. He saw 60% of the snaps on average. He had dropped to, he saw 59% with A-Chain going out. He had dropped a little bit behind A-Chain going into last week, but should pick it back up and did after A-Chain came out. Overall for the season, 3.6 yards before contact, 1.8 yards after contact, 5.4 yards per rush attempt, and he's already scored 7 times on the ground. I don't think we overthink this one against the defense that's given up a ton of explosive runs. It's kind of a lot of Swiss cheese type defense. I think we just go to the Mostert play. Even if he's popular. 6,400 on DK. There's value there. 8,500 on the FanDuel slate. A little bit more expensive. Forgot to So 5th on DK by points, 3rd by point per dollar, 5th on FanDuel by points, and still, even at 8,500, 8th by point per dollar at running back. Not a bad option at all. Again, I don't really sweat individual ownership. So when people are out there halfway through the first quarter complaining, oh, look at all the suckers who played this guy and, he's going off. So kind of like last week, a lot of the chalk running backs hit. A lot of people seem to have issues with it. Oh, those are bad plays, even though they're really not. They're just good plays. Chalk is chalk for a reason. Don't sweat individual ownership. Don't let people talk you out of plays just because they're popular. Especially in football, you need to have that nest. I've talked about it a bunch of times, right? And especially at running back, those are the guys who have this more secure floors because a lot of it's volume based. So when you've got a good running back at a good price in a great situation with a ton of talent, just play him. And he comes up in Sims. All the data supports it. Don't let people talk you out of those things. Trey says, I really only like the chalk running backs this week. I'm kind of with you on that one, Trey. Kind of with you there. There's a couple that I think could come through in terms of, I think, lower owned situations. And we'll go through them. But it's a lot of chalk running back. And to me, that's the better way to approach it anyway. That's why I've said multiple times when I evaluate plays and like when I build the groups and everything, when I use optimizers, I go fairly heavy on randomness for receivers, for pass catchers, because I consider that to be more event-based. They've got multiple compound things that need to happen, right? You get the obvious split between do they call a rushing play or a passing play, right? That's an obvious needs to happen for anybody on the field. But if you get to a rushing play, you're primarily, in most situations, you've got your lead back who's going to see most of the volume, and that becomes a rate-based situation. Out of X amount of running plays that they're calling per game, this guy gets Y carries, and he puts up Z yards per attempt. That becomes very rate-based. You can skew it based on who they're facing and so on and so forth. But when you get to the passing attack, let's say they make the decision, we're going to throw the ball on this play. Well, now you've got 2 wideouts on a tight end, 3 wideouts on a tight end, a running back. There's all different directions that pass could go to. You do have a certain amount of, ability to evaluate it based on, all right, this guy's running routes on X amount of plays. He's getting targeted on Y% of those routes, and he's catching Z% of those targets because the quarterback at a AA percentage throws a good ball to him. It's just so many compound factors when it comes to the receivers that I like to go heavy randomness on receivers. I like to have a broader pool of receivers. If I have a fairly highly concentrated pool of running backs that's primarily focused around the chalk running backs, I actually think that's a fairly strong way to approach a build. How often do we get a super off-the-radar running back really comes through versus a off-the-radar wide receiver or off-the-radar tight end? It's really about the pass catchers in terms of where the randomness comes in. Not entirely, not exclusively. Sure, random running backs have had big days, obviously. But for me, I am totally fine going with chalky running backs. Lecture over. Let's keep on rolling. Thielen, tons of volume. 44 routes, saw 13 targets, caught 11 of 13 for 107 yards and a touchdown in week 5. That was his second week this season with 11 catches and more than 100 yards. 3 touchdown catches with 1 in each of... what the hell? 3 touchdown catches with 1 in each of 3 of 5 games. I should write notes that I can actually comprehend. I think what I'm trying to say is that he's caught a touchdown in 3 individual games out of the 5 that they've played. I'm pretty sure that's what I'm trying to say. In week 1, he was only targeted twice. Every other week, he's gotten 8 or more targets. He saw 4 red zone targets in week 5. They're looking Adam Thielen's way when they're in close. They're looking for Adam Thielen to be the primary guy helping them move the ball down the field. He's an interesting option. 5,900, 7,400. He ranks 28th and 35th on DK, 24th and 37th on FanDuel. This is where it falls apart for the when we start actually ranking these guys against the competition. But if you're going to a Carolina receiver, it's the Thielen show all day. DJ Shark, decent downfield option, who is, of course, not going to come up in these numbers because of his name and probably the initials, I would imagine. Maybe not. Whatever. So many different ways this could go. Shark giving us a 1.1 yards per route run, 1.2 yards per route run on average, with a 15.3 yard ADOT. 11.3 yard ADOT from Mingo. He's the Mingo's the option that I like a little bit better, just saving a little bit of money on him. I think that's a reasonable option. He came up a decent amount of the time in some of the top sims just because of his price point, and he projects out okay for that money. Last week, DJ Shark ran 39 routes, saw 6 targets, caught 3 of them for 42 yards, did score a touchdown. Ran 54 routes and was targeted 11 times. Just caught 4 of 11 passes for 86 yards and a touchdown in week 3. So that's what you need. You need the big downfield home run play out of DJ. For Mingo, on his side, 40 routes, saw 7 targets, 5 of 7 for 48 yards last week after missing week 4. 14 routes, but 6 targets and 3 of 6 for 21 yards in week 4 before he exited that game. 41 routes in week 1. He's been involved. I think he's a reasonable option for money, for the salary rather. As a bring back play against Miami, which is where he was primarily coming up, I do think he's on the board. I think he's a reasonable enough option there. Hayden Hurst, limited tight end, 3 targets last week, 3 of 3 for 21 yards, 0 red zone targets. For the season, though, he saw 2 targets week 1 in the red zone, 1 week 2, 0, 1, 0 the last 3 weeks. So they're looking his direction a little bit. Basically, when they're not calling Thielen's number in the red zone, they're looking in Hayden Hurst's direction. But not really a guy I want to have that much of. I think my priorities in the passing game for Carolina probably go Thielen, then Mingo. And then whatever shares I get of these guys, it's fine. These guys, a little bit more precious about. My Tyreek Hill note says Tyreek Hill is Tyreek Hill. And then I added a little bit to it. I was going to leave it at that, but I wanted to have a little bit of context. Week 5, he only ran 17 routes. He was targeted 9 times on those 17 routes, caught 8 of them for 181 yards and a touchdown, which is just absurd. 31 routes in week 4. Saw only 5 targets, 58 yards in that game against Buffalo. Season low. The only week this season that he had no touchdowns. 6 touchdowns on the season. 2, 1, 1, 0 against Buffalo, and then 1 last week. His target volume, 15, 9, 11, 5, and then 9 last week. He's just an absolute beast. Don't overthink it. Similar to what I was saying about the running back chalk. Don't overthink it. Find ways to get different elsewhere. Just play Tyreek Hill. If you're going to Tua, combine him with Tyreek Hill a whole bunch of times. 30% of the targets on the season, 10 a game is what those numbers amount to. 7 targets a game for Jalen Waddle, 16% of the volume. Tyreek's given us 90.4 yards per game, 5 touchdowns already. And as I said, he scored in all but one of their games. A 12.2 yard ADOT, 9.4% of the air yard share. He's seen 8 targets in the red zone. Waddle's been targeted 5 times in the red zone. This team throws the ball aggressively. It's a great option for fantasy. Tyreek, 1st and 11th on DK. 1st and 3rd on FanDuel. Jalen not far behind. 10th, 38th for value for point per dollar on DK at 7,600. It's pricey, but still well worth getting to. The hope there is that the price knocks down his ownership a little bit lower than it should be. On FanDuel, he's 8th and 7th because he only costs 6,800. That is an absolute bargain. Getting the second banana in that passing attack for 3,000 less than Tyreek Hill. I know there's a talent gap here, but is it a $3,000 talent gap? I don't know about that. If we get Jalen Waddle week at that price, that's a monster value. 21 routes, 10 targets last week, 5 of 10 for 35 yards, scored a touchdown. 4 of 5 for 46 yards on his 27 routes in week 4. Only 1 touchdown on the season. That was the one last week, came against the Giants. But I think we know Jalen Waddle's got plenty of talent to support the upside. Outside of that, Ced Wilson, 4 targets last week, 52 yards. Only ran 10 routes, though, 29 snaps. I don't love the option. I feel like maybe it gets a little trappy around the idea that he was out there playing. Robbie Chosen, Braxton Berrios, Chase Claypool. I don't know how much Claypool's going to be involved. He hasn't played in 3 weeks. Didn't play last week after getting picked up by this team. Robbie Chosen, 3 routes, 0 targets week 5, 9 routes, 1 target week 4. His big week came 14 routes, 1 target, 1 of 1 for 68 yards and a touchdown in week 3. That was with Waddle out. Don't expect much. Braxton Berrios, 20 snaps with the offense, 9 on special teams in week 5. He ran 12 routes, 2 of 2 for 13 yards. In week 4, he had 28 snaps on offense, ran 19 routes, 6 of 6 for 43 yards and a touchdown. But with a filled out, healthy pool of receivers, I expect we're talking just special teams work for Braxton Berrios. Larry's playing catch up at 1.5x speed. We're going through a lot, Larry. I'm trying to talk as fast as possible to get us through this one. And I think we can kind of move on because we're not really going to much of the downstream guys here from Miami. I think we're focused on the obvious, plus Raheem Mostert. Maybe a little Durham Smythe. Ran 20 routes but wasn't targeted week 5. 44 snaps with the offense. Week 4, 50 snaps, ran 24 routes. Saw 4 targets, 4 of 4 for 41 yards. Week 3 was the concern. He only ran 6 routes that week. That Hill guy came in, and we were talking about him a little bit after that. Julian Hill came in and picked up some routes that week, but that seems to just have been an oddity. So I think we're just back to Durham Smythe if we want a tight end from this team. Not a great option. Doesn't really project well. Doesn't really rank out well. It's true for all these guys. Nobody's really getting a projection. It's just these two and Raheem Mostert. But that's enough. Outside of that, I think we're good here. All right. Baker Mayfield, QB9. QB7 by value on the DK board, QB9 on FanDuel, 8 by value on the FanDuel slate. Maybe I buried Baker Mayfield on this a little bit. Going up against the Detroit team that ranks 6th with a 5.8 yards per pass attempt. But they've given up a fair amount of passing touchdowns. Given up 8 passing touchdowns on the season. That ranks 6th worst. They do gain a pretty aggressive amount of pressure, 26.4% pressure rate, 22.4% on the other side to face Jared Goff. He's going up against a pass D that's allowed just 4 touchdowns, a 7.7 yard defensive A-dot versus an 8.1, 5.6 versus 5.4 yards in terms of the pass attempt, or 6.8, 6.0, 5.8, depending on which scale you believe, because these things never agree with one another when I take them from different sites on different tabs, which is just fucking annoying. Why would that be different from tab to tab? Yards are yards. Whatever. Either way, none of those numbers are overly intimidating. So Baker for price, for potential in a game that doesn't really project in Vegas like a shootout, but has a ton of skill. I could see this one getting up and going a little bit for fantasy. Both defenses are okay. Goff, 4th in yards per pass attempt. Week 5, he went 20 of 28 for 236 yards through 3 touchdowns. Added a rushing touchdown. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns on the season. Baker in his week 4 game, they were on a bye last week, 25 of 32 for 246 yards through 3 touchdowns. Interception. That was his best week of the season, but he's got good weapons to throw to. I like Godwin. I like Evans. And the way that Baker's projecting out for the money, I'm actually probably going to have a little bit of Tampa Bay stacks. I know I said at the top of the show I probably wouldn't, but they'll be down board. They'll be limited in volume. I prefer the skill players as just random guys in lineups or as bring back plays against the Detroit stack. But I can get behind a little bit of Baker here. Goff's good game last time out also came with Jahmyr Gibbs out and Amon-Ra St. Brown out. So that's pretty impressive with one of their primary running backs and their top overall wide receiver out. It's going to be David Montgomery day again. Another running back, just ride the chalk with Montgomery. He's been great so far this season. 75% of the snaps last week, 68% on average. He's got 6 rushing touchdowns already, 4.2 yards per rush attempt, giving us 92 yards a game on 22 carries. Plenty of volume, plenty of talent. 2.25 targets a game, 1.25 receptions. Last week, 45 snaps, carried the ball 19 times for 109 yards and a touchdown. Also saw 6 targets, only caught 2 of them for 20 yards, but 6 targets is not insignificant. 51 snaps in week 4 after his missed week in week 3. Carried the ball 32 times for 121 yards and 3 touchdowns in a monster performance. Craig Reynolds was also involved in the absence of Jahmyr Gibbs last week. 22% of the snaps, that amounted to 13 total snaps. 7 carries for 52 yards and scored a touchdown. Talented guy. For the cheap pricing, you could do worse. He doesn't project out well, doesn't draw a great point per dollar mark because he would be basically touchdown dependent. You're talking about like a yardage, handful of carries, some yardage in this projection. But if he scores that touchdown, we accelerate aggressively here. So he's not off the board as a dart throw running back. Rachaad White on this side of the game. 47 snaps in their week 4 game. Carried the ball 15 times for 56 yards. In week 3, carried the ball 14 times for 38 yards. Pretty limited in yards per carry. He's seen 3 targets each of the last 2 weeks. 3 of 3 both times, 24 and 22 yards. Seeing plenty of volume, but not really doing a whole heck of a lot with it. 3.3 yards per rush attempt. Just 1 rushing touchdown. 2.1 yards before, 1.2 yards after contact. The volume's absolutely there to support the play. He's just really not getting the job done. 5,500, 6,300. Running back 15, 11th by DK value, points per dollar. 16th and 15th on FanDuel. Probably more of an impact on the DK slate overall than on the FanDuel slate, just given the pricing. But not an option I really like against a pretty stout rush defense. 3.3 yards per rush attempt, 68 yards per game. Less than a touchdown allowed per game on the ground for Detroit. I don't love the ground game for Tampa Bay here, and haven't really gone to a bunch of Rachaad White yet this season. Keyshawn Vaughn, Sean Tucker, just not involved enough. Where are they on this board? 3.3 versus 3.3. Yeah, that one actually matches. What about the other side? 4.1. 4.1. Hey, all right. Both of these match on this one. 4.1, 3.3. In the passing game, Amon-Ra should be back. No injury designation for him right now. In week 4, last time we saw him healthy, 7 targets on 32 routes run in 64 snaps. So basically out there for, I can tell you exactly. Oh, no, I can't because he wasn't out there last week. So 2 weeks back, out there for roughly 85% of the snaps. Ran routes on like half of those. He was targeted on 7 targets on the 32 routes, 5 of 7 for 56 yards and a touchdown. 12 targets on 35 routes run in week 3, went 9 of 12 for 102. Had 102 in week 2 also on 6 of 7. Their lead receiver, a tremendous talent, plenty of opportunity in this game. Ranked 7th on DK by points, but 36th by point per dollar is obviously a downgrade in quality. Fairly expensive at $7,700, but worth it. 12th and 17th on FanDuel. A little ding in the value there as well, but again, worth it. Sam Laporte is currently questionable. He is dealing with something. I didn't make a note of what Laporte is dealing with. I think he's expected to play. Last I saw, they're expecting him to be out there, but did pick up a Q tag middle of the week. Let me see if there's any update, actually. We'll get projections and everything updated on the site this evening. Calf injury. Per Eric Woodard of ESPN, so this is per Eric Woodyard, and that note is per RotoWire. Laporta said Friday that he expects to play. Calf injury probably last week's game. Flared up on Wednesday, sat out Thursday, returned Friday. I think he's going to play. 425 game, though. So a little bit of a wrinkle. Obviously, we'd like to get the confirmation as we're building lineups. But I'm steamrolling ahead as though Laporta's playing, and I think he's a pretty tremendous option. 52 snaps, ran 20 routes, 3 of 4 for 47 yards, and 2 touchdowns last time out. 1 target in the red zone in 3 of his last 4 weeks, so he's getting looks in the red zone. He's been one of the favored tight ends across fantasy sports. Tight end 2 on the DK board, tight end 2 on the FanDuel board by points, 8th and 6th by point per dollar. So obviously we're not that concerned about any limitations here. Overall, he's drawing 6 targets a game, 20% of their volume, their second most targeted pass catching option. He's seen 3 targets in the red zone. Amon-Ra's seen 4. Reynolds has 3. Josh Reynolds not uninvolved in the passing attack either. 45th and 49th. Another guy where, it's more based on catches and yardage in this projection. There's a little bit of a touchdown share, but we're talking about mostly a yardage and catch-based projection where it accelerates aggressively if he manages to get that in the end zone. Over the course of the season, 5 games, 70% of the snaps on average, just 47%. Last time out, ran routes on 43% of those, targeted on 42% of the routes that he ran. So basically a third of their play, or quarter of their plays, they were targeting him. 5 targets per game overall, 3.2 receptions a game, 90.94 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air already, 12.4 yard ADOT, their primary downfield weapon. Khalif Raymond's also going downfield, and you've got Jameson back in this passing attack now. Jameson missed all but week 5. He played 28 snaps in his return. He ran 14 routes. He was targeted 3 times. 2 of 3, picked up 2 yards. Not a monster performance in his first game back. But I think we'll see fairly aggressive steps forward to try and get the ball in his hands. For 3,600, I think he can definitely be involved in your DK plans. 5,500, same story on FanDuel. The Tampa Bay side, Mike Evans. 4 routes. Week 4. Their last game. Week 4, ran 20 routes. Targeted 3 times for 40 yards. Caught all 3 of them, 40 yards. No touchdowns. Left with a hamstring that week, but came up fine. No injury designation going into this week. 60 yards and a touchdown in week 3 on 10 targets. Caught 5 of them. 6 for 8 on 27 routes run in week 2. Had 171 yards and a touchdown on 6 catches, 27 routes that week. Their primary number 1 receiver. Kind of put him in the same bag as Adam Thielen with guys who have been doing it for quite a while, continuing to do it, but it comes as a surprise for reasons to us. 8 targets a game, 26% of the volume. 8 targets a game for Chris Godwin, 25% of the volume. A 13.5 yard ADOT, more downfield looks for Evans. Godwin operating a little bit more inside, 8.7 yard ADOT, 6.6% of the air yards. He saw 50 snaps, ran 37 routes, had 11 targets, went 8 of 11 for 114 yards, but 0 touchdowns in their last game. That was his most involved week. That was after Evans, or part of it anyway, after Evans came out of the game. Yet to score this year. The only time he's gone over 60 yards or 5 catches was that game when Evans came out. But he's Chris Godwin. We've seen it work. We've seen it work with both of them. It seems like Evans is the preferred option for Baker, but Godwin's going to get the ball. Godwin's going to have his weeks. At salary, 6,300, taking that big a discount down from 76 for Evans when they project out not all that differently, puts Godwin ahead in the points per dollar. Oh, excuse me, that's on FanDuel. On DK, the story is different. On DK, he's 69 versus 71. 22nd ranked, 51st by value versus Evans at 71, 13th ranked, 39th by value. That's 13th, 19th, and 26th, 16th on FanDuel. So different story site to site for those two. Godwin, definitely a better option on the FanDuel board, but playable on DK for sure. Trey Palmer, Devin Tompkins, Raheem Jarrett. We're getting very thin down toward the bottom of this board. Tompkins 4-4 for 45 yards and a touchdown in week 4, though. Ran 29 routes on 42 snaps. His weekly targets have gone 3, 0, 4, and 4 on 12 routes, 22 routes, an undetermined number of routes that there was a 0 for, and then 29 routes. Probably the third wide receiver option in that offense, but pretty limited in terms of the times that they look for him and what the output's been. Raheem Jarrett picked up a few additional snaps the last time out, 13 snaps. It was his season high in 4 games. That was with Evans coming out with the hamstring. I'm not looking for Raheem Jarrett here. Cade Otton, 3 of 4 for 13 yards and a touchdown in week 4, ran 30 routes. His target share has been 3, 6, 2, and 4 on 26, 27, undetermined, and 30 routes. So he's out there running routes. He's relatively involved. He's a very cheap tight end. 3,200 on DK, 4,900 on FanDuel. He's one of those guys where I've put everything else into my lineup, but if I use a cheap tight end, I can get to running back X. If I use an expensive or like mid-board tight end who's basically the same, I have to be limited to my other skill player selection. I think he's that kind of a tight end. Touchdown dependent for sure, but minorly playable, especially if you're going to some Baker stacks. Minorly playable. Nothing really down here interests me that much. Like these two options a lot. Playable, minorly playable. Like these two options a lot. Playable, minorly playable. Oops. Another one of our biggies. Indy and Jacksonville. Man. I'm either going to be a charter member of the I Love Trevor Lawrence or I Hate Trevor Lawrence club this week. Or it's probably too late to be a charter member, but I might be joining that club. It'll be the first week that I really, at least that I can remember, that I'll be getting to him this aggressively. Where I expect to be on Lawrence this week, I don't think I've rostered him that much versus the field so far. I had some of them last year when he was good. I've rostered some of them this year. But this is probably going to be the spot where I'll be the most aggressive. So if you just tend to bet against me and against my luck, that's your spot. It doesn't necessarily lead to the Indy D by any means, but run screaming from the Trevor Lawrence play if you don't believe, because that's going to be where I'm going to be at. 3.8 yards per rush attempt ranks 13th for the Indy defense. They're kind of a pass funnel. 24th ranks 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Really supports the upside for Trevor Lawrence here. He's got Calvin Ridley to work with. He's got Christian Kirk to work with. He's got Evan Engram to work with. Travis Etienne. A lot of options here. I like this Jacksonville team. Gardner Minshew on the other side is cheap, 5,000, 6,500. Projects out all right. Going up against the 10th ranked 3.7 yards per rush attempt, but 26th ranked 7.2 yards per pass attempt defense. Definitely potential for both of these teams to just kind of bottle up the run and say, hey, have at it with the pass game. Let's have a shootout. That's what we're looking for. It could be a day where they zig when everybody's expecting them to zag. Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss split 30 carries evenly. Travis Etienne gets his 25 carries, 22 carries, whatever it might be. And there's limited passing attack, but it's not what I'm seeing. It's not what Vegas likes. It's not what the defenses would push these teams to do. So plenty of support for this game to go off through the air. We could start with Gardner. Oh, Indy's also the top-ranked team in pace in the league, and when Minshew played in Week 3, they were even faster. In Week 2, he came into the game 19 of 23 for 171 yards and a touchdown. Week 3 start went 27 of 44, 227 yards and a touchdown, and then came in again in Week 5 after Richardson went down, 11 of 14 for 155 yards, no touchdowns. But yeah, serviceable backup work for sure. The start wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. 27 of 44, 227 yards and a touchdown. We've seen Minshew do this before. What's his most recent, most relevant game? How about at Dallas last year? Against a pretty good pass defense. 24 of 40 for 355 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. That was week 16. I don't remember who was active or anything like that. Against what was also a good pass defense, New Orleans, the following week, 18 of 32 for 274, 1-1. Those were his only 2 significant games last year. Couple of 240 yards and 2 TDs, 186 yards and 2 TDs in 2 games in 2021. It's been a minute. Going back to 2020 was when he had that little outburst over the first 7 weeks. In 7 weeks, he had 12 touchdowns. And call it, 3 games with more than 300 yards, a 275-yard game, and a 243-yard game in there, with 173 exactly in the other 2. He's got ability. He ranks 12th and 6th on DK. He ranks 12th and 7th on FanDuel. Going up against the defense that's allowed 8 touchdowns through the air, 8.1 yard defensive ADOT. Gaining pressure 26.2% of the times. They blitz a lot. On the other side, Trevor Lawrence going up against the team gaining pressure 20% of the time. Limited blitzes. He's thrown 5 TDs on the year, 251 yards average. Throwing the ball 36 times a game. The volume's definitely there. 7 yards per pass attempt, 4.4 air yards per attempt, 7.1 intended air yards per attempt. So throwing the ball downfield. He's thrown the ball 15 times in the red zone, so there's plenty to support the touchdown upside. Like the option. Second on DK, second on FanDuel. Tops, I believe. Let me confirm that again. Yep, tops. Him then Tua in those sims that I was talking about. By the way, if you're out there, I love that Kush. I will answer your questions about all of Roto Grinders products after the show, because apparently I work for Roto Grinders now. I know you're just asking because I've talked before about how I use their optimizer and stuff, and totally happy to help you out and answer those questions if you're even here. So winding our way through this one, let's jump to the running game. As I said, they're talking about Jonathan Taylor picking up touches. Last week he came back, he played 10 snaps, carried the ball 6 times, had 1 catch on 1 target, ran 4 routes. The 6 carries amounted to 18 yards. Wasn't exactly a monster season debut for Jonathan Taylor. Zach Moss obviously outplayed him pretty dramatically. 49 snaps. That was 2 more than he saw in week 4. Fewer than weeks 2 or 3. He saw 55 and 64 snaps those 2 weeks. But it was more than he saw in week 4 with Taylor out. He had 23 carries for 165 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. Carries were the second highest behind the 30 that he had in week 3. He ran 20 routes, 2 of 2 for 30 more yards through the air. Zach Moss was the clear RB1 last week. That very easily could flip. I've got it basically as a directly split between the two. And really, honestly, they're a little bit highly projected for a direct split, but that's the way it fell. Going up against a pretty decent rush D. I don't really love the options when I don't know where the ball's going. Like I said before, I like to chase volume at running back. I like to make it a rate-based decision. Don't make it a wild card decision. Get your wild cards with the pass catchers. Travis Etienne, 26 carries for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns, 4 of 5 receiving on 29 routes for 48 more yards last week in London. If you missed the London games, Etienne's been a monster. 20 carries for 55 yards on 54 snaps in week 4. An additional 3 targets for 27 routes. This was his first game, the last game out, first game over 100 rush yards on the season. Had 18 carries for 77 yards and a touchdown with 5 catches on 5 targets for 27 yards against this same defense in week 1. So Etienne had a pretty decent game that week. Got himself in the end zone. Has been improving as the season's gone on. Projects out great. 3rd on the DK board by points, 7th by point per dollar, 4th and 3rd on the FanDuel slate. Getting 4.2 yards per rush attempt, 79 a game, 19 carries a game. All the volume you could possibly want. Tank Bigsby is the only other running back that got snaps last week. I think you can safely ignore him. It's the Travis Etienne game. In the receiving game, Pittman, the primary for Indy, 9 targets a game, 28.8% of the volume, played 100% of the snaps last week, plays 98% of the snaps on average. He runs routes basically on 40% of the plays that this team runs because he's out there every play. He's targeted on 27% of those. So if you boil it down, like 27, call it 25% of the plays that they run as an offense are passes to Michael Pittman. That's decent volume. He's turned it into 1 touchdown, 6.2 catches a game, 47.9 yards, a 7.7 yard ADOT, not exactly operating a lot downfield. Alec Pierce is the downfield guy, 17.1 yard ADOT, getting 3 targets a game, only 0.8 yards per route run on average, 0.4 last week. Josh Downs is similar to Pittman in terms of where they operate on the field, just a 6.8 yard ADOT, putting up 7.73 yards per target so far. Hasn't gotten in the end zone. Granson's gotten in the end zone. Pierce is also not. The red zone targets basically dominated by Pittman. 3 for Downs, 3 for Granson, only 1 for Pierce. And Ogletree's not coming up here because he's probably Andrew Ogletree or something else in the stats. Looking at the week by week, Pittman, last 2 games combined, just 6 catches for 67 yards. So that's a little bit concerning. 61 snaps, 26 routes, 5 of 7 for 52 yards, 0 touchdowns last week. 26 routes run, just 1 of 5 for 15 yards in week 4. That's kind of a disaster game. 9 for 11 for 77 yards, no touchdowns in week 3. His target shares have gone 11, 12, 11, 5, and 7 on 45, 37, 57, and then just 26 routes each of the last 2 weeks. So a little bit of a downturn overall for Pittman. Down 6 of 6 for 97 yards on 36 routes run, 42 snaps last week. 2 of 3 for 34 yards in week 4. Has not gotten over 100 yards. His high before last week's 97, his high was 57 yards. That was on 8 of 12 in week 3, 51 routes. But he's their number 2. Pierce, 1 of 2 for just 10 yards. His targets have been 3, 2, 7, 2, and 2. So again, super limited in terms of the amount of times they're looking in Pierce's direction. Home run type play. Ogletree ran 9 routes, was targeted twice last week, 16 yards. He's seen 2 targets, didn't play, 2 targets, 4 targets, 2 targets. We're talking about a very limited option. Granson sees more targets, 6, 4, 4, 5, and 3 overall for the season. Runs more routes. Hasn't done a ton. 2 of 3 for 15 yards in week 5. 54.5% route run rate, leads the tight end group on this team, but middling returns at best. Week 5 for Calvin Ridley. Premium option down here. 6 on DK in both categories. 4th and 1st on the FanDuel slate. I was getting an absolute ton of Calvin Ridley in those sims. He only cost $7,000 on FanDuel. Monster spot. With the top projected top option at quarterback. Last week, 7 of 8 for 122. No touchdown. Played 70 snaps, ran 44 routes. Just 2 of 2 for 38 yards, but scored a touchdown in a limited week 4. He ran 31 routes on 51 snaps. His targets have been 11, 8, 7, 2, and 8. So that 2 target game was just a little bit of an oddball in there. But overall, he's out there running routes, 35, 32, 36, 31, and 44 routes. The primary receiver, the go-to option in this offense. In terms of the downfield looks, 12.3 yard ADOT, putting up 9.25 yards per target. He's gotten in the end zone just twice, but he is the lead downfield option, the lead option in a passing attack that I like. Zay Jones is out. Christian Kirk should see an uptick. Last week he went 6 of 8 for 78 yards, but didn't score. In week 4, 8 of 12 for 84 yards, didn't score. His targets have gone 3, 14, 6, 12, 8, kind of back and forth in terms of the targets, but a talented receiver. Plenty of options there. He's seen just 1 target in the red zone so far versus the 6 that Calvin Ridley's seen. Nobody else targeted in the red zone yet. 7.79 yards per target. Jamal Agnew giving you 9 yards per target. No touchdowns. 2 targets a game. 3.3% of the target share. Not a great option. He missed week 4, came back for 10 snaps last week. He ran 6 routes, was not targeted, had 1 carry for 1 yard. You want to get even deeper? Tim Jones ran 12 routes last week, 22 snaps. 0 for 1. In week 4, he went 1 for 1 for -1 yards on 20 routes run. It's impressive. You're dealing with a basically 2-headed wide receiver attack plus a pretty good tight end in Evan Engram. He's probably either the third or the second best pass catcher on this team. 4 of 8 for 28 yards in week 5. Hasn't been over 67 yards. He got that in week 3. He's seen 5 targets. He saw 5 targets week 1 and then 8 targets in each of the last 4 weeks. He's yet to score a touchdown. They're coming. The Evan Engram game is coming. 3rd by points and value on DK. 3rd and 2nd on FanDuel at the position. I like the Evan Engram option in stacks. It becomes difficult because you want to have Ridley, you want to have some Engram, you certainly want to mix some Kirk in, and you want to have some ATN in addition to your in alongside your Trevor Lawrence stacks. So it's just a matter of staggering them across what you can afford, which guy gets you to better skill players that go along with them, which guy gets you to shares of Michael Pittman as your bring back option. So really interesting team to build with, but a lot of good ways considering that it's multiple capable wideouts, a capable tight end, and a capable running back. You got a lot of different ways to build that Jag stack. So I like that one a lot. It is Jacksonville week here. Minnie and Chicago. We've talked about this one a little bit in terms of the weather. Potentially limiting the passing attacks where we're looking for some passing. And we also talked about the limited nature of the Chicago rushing attack this week. Overall, 43.5 points in Vegas. A 2.5 point spread. Chicago, bottom third of the league in pace. Middle in terms of their passing rate, but they throw a lot in the red zone. Minnie's first in pass rate, kind of high paced, but no Justin Jefferson is going to completely change the dynamics of this passing attack overall. Cousins facing a defense that ranks 31st with 8 yards per pass attempt allowed versus 11th with 3.7 yards per rush attempt. Another D that's kind of pass funnelish should benefit Kirk Cousins here. He's still got Hawkinson to work with, a very solid tight end. Addison and Osborne for whatever they're worth at the wide receiver position. Cousins ranks 8th but 21st by points per dollar on DK. 8th and 14th on FanDuel, where he's a little bit more affordable for the relative salary. He's thrown 13 touchdown passes on the season. I believe that still leads the league or thereabouts. 299 yards a game, throwing the ball 40 times a game, 27.4 yard completions, 4.6 air yards per attempt on a 7.9 intended air yards per attempt. But Justin Jefferson has so much to do with so much of this. It is really, really concerning. For Fields' part, most of his productions come in the last 2 weeks. He's top 3 quarterback for fantasy in each of the last 2 weeks. Last week, he went 15 of 29 for 282 yards and 4 touchdowns. 28 of 35 for 335 and 4 touchdowns in week 4. 11 carries, 57 yards in week 5. Week 4 didn't run quite as much, 4 carries for 25 yards, but obviously 2 monster games in a row. And we're dealing with a day where, as mentioned, they're going to be without Khalil Herbert, Rashawn Johnson, and Travis Homer in the backfield. They're down to Donta Foreman, who hasn't played since week 1, Darrington Evans, who hasn't played at all, and Kerry Blasingame, who is a fullback by trade. Justin Fields has an opportunity to be the primary running back for this team while also playing quarterback. It's not a great option on the ground here. Foreman, in that week 1 game, 21 snaps, 5 carries for 16 yards. Caught 2 of 3 passes for 15. 2 of 3 passes on 15 routes for 8 yards. Darrington Evans, again, hasn't played in the NFL this year. Kerry Blasingame did pick up 8 carries for 26 yards last week. Saw 7 routes, but 0 targets. But again, a fullback by trade. It's really, really limited. Just kind of, the Chicago running game just kind of supports the idea of Justin Fields is going to run the ball more, in my mind. I don't really need shares of any of these guys. Foreman, I guess, technically 21st by value, 22nd by value. They're better options. It's a 22 team board. So if he ranks 22nd by value, there's probably better options from basically every other team or thereabouts. I know those teams with multiple guys. On this side, I don't love that split. Alexander Madison last week, 36 snaps, carried the ball 8 times for 26 yards. He ran 19 routes, 2 of 3 for 20 yards and a touchdown through the air. Saw 29 snaps in week 4, 17 carries for 95 yards, ran 9 routes. The possibility that maybe based on the added routes, they're kind of looking at it as shuffle Madison more into the passing game, have Akers a little bit more involved in the ground game. Last week, 19 snaps for Akers, 5 carries for 15 yards, ran 6 routes, saw 2 targets. In week 4, 14 snaps, 5 carries for 40 yards. Just 5 carries in each of those first 2 games for him. I don't like either one of the options all that much. Probably would be more invested in the Madison shares given how he projects, given the expected involvement. Even if he becomes a little bit relegated more to a passing role, there's opportunity out of the backfield in the passing game in this one anyway, and he's still going to be putting his hands on the ball probably more than Akers. So I prefer him out of the 2, but I don't really need to go out of my way for him. 13th and 12th on DK, 14th and 17th on FanDuel. Akers just doesn't really rate for me. As a dart throw, as a touchdown dependent guy for 4,800, if you wanted to, it's fine, but not really a prime option for me. DJ Moore, a couple of monster performances. 8 of 10 last week for 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. Week before, 8 of 9 for 131 and a touchdown. Had another 100-yard game in week 2, 6 of 7. The clear-cut favorite target in this offense right now. Developed a nice connection with Fields. Certainly the opportunity to go off. That said, doesn't project great. 25th, 22nd on the FanDuel slate. Not great for the value pricing either. Not exactly sure why that is. Cole Kmet drawing a little bit better of a relative projection. 5th in tight ends. 5th by value. 5th on FanDuel and 7th by value over there. Kmet, 5 of 5 for 42 yards and a touchdown last week. 7 of 9 for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 4. Probably the second best target in this passing game. Can definitely get to some shares of Cole Kmet. And I kind of like the way, even if we're talking about a game where we're going to Fields, where we're looking for him to run the ball, where we're thinking maybe the pass attack in this game will be a little bit limited by the conditions and so on and so forth. Going to Fields plus tight end, where broken play, scrambles out, and oh, look who popped open, dunks the ball over the defense into the end zone from 10 yards out type of plays. I like that idea of Cole Kmet pairing well with Justin Fields in this one, even if you're expecting the passing attack to be a little bit more limited. Darnell Mooney, the third man in, doesn't project all that great. He is 13th by point per dollar value on the DK board, even with only an 8-point projection that ranks 42nd overall because he costs just 3,700. On FanDuel, where he costs 5,800, doesn't rank out great at all, 42nd and 43rd. He was 0 for 4 last week, ran 32 routes on 50 snaps, but came up empty on his 4 targets. 4 of 4 the week before, caught all 4 of his targets for 51 yards on 53 snaps, 37 routes run. He's had, in 3 of 5 games, he's had 0 catches. 2 games with 4 catches. Not ideal. That's probably why he costs $3,700 on DK, where they got it right. I don't know why he's as expensive as he is on FanDuel. He's a mix-in. Definitely a better play on the DraftKings slate, Darnell Mooney. At the tight end position after Cole Kmet, you're dealing with very limited looks for Tanyan and Mercedes Lewis. I don't think you're going there. I don't think you're looking down board to Trent Taylor or Velus Jones. Jones, 2 routes run each of the last 2 weeks, 0 targets for the season, 2 carries for the season. Not getting a lot of action. On the Minnesota side, we're looking for TJ Hawkinson. We're looking for Jordan Addison. A little bit less for KJ Osborne, but he's on the board. I think Hawkinson's going to be your primary, though. Last week, 5 of 8 for 51 yards. Didn't score. 30 routes on 53 snaps. He ran 16 routes on 40 snaps in week 4. Just 3 targets. Caught 2 of them for 24 yards. Bigger game in week 3. Played 69 snaps. Ran 48 routes. Caught 8 of 11. 2 touchdowns in week 2. But we know TJ Hawkinson is a very high-end tight end. It's just, do they bottle him up because they're not really that worried about these 2 receivers without Justin Jefferson out there? What does the passing game look like overall? But he projects out first on the board on DK, first by points on both sites, first by point per dollar on FanDuel, where he costs 6,700, 13th by point per dollar for 6,600 against the lower relative salary on DK. Addison, ankle injury, no designation coming into the week though, should be good to go. Last week, 64 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets, caught 6 of them. Week 4, just played 25 snaps, ran 14 routes, targeted once, no catches. His route running has gone 29, 34, 42, 14, and 34. Targets have been 6, 5, 8, 1, and 9. Probably the first wide receiver option at this point. KJ, 5 of 9 for 49 yards last week. His target share has gone 6, 6, 3, 2, and then the bump up to 9 last week. 3 catches, 1, 1, and 5 catches. Scored a touchdown in weeks 2 and 3. Has not been over 50 yards on the season. Whoops. That's not the arrow button. 8.8 yard ADOT for KJ. Addison more downfield operator at 12.3. And then you've got Brandon Powell here, 10.1 yard ADOT. Last week he got in the game, 21 snaps, ran 14 routes. He was targeted 6 times on those 14 routes. Put up 43 yards. Before that, he had only run 4 routes all season. 1 target, 1 of 1 for 5 yards in week 3. 5 snaps that week, and in week 1... 5 snaps that week, and in 5 snaps that week, and in week 1. 4 were only offensive snaps before last week. Whatever that note means, he's not seeing a lot of snaps. He'll probably see a bit of an uptick. He does have downfield ability. It's a mix-in type of an option for value. 58th and 53rd on DK, 54th and 55th on FanDuel. We're not talking about a priority option. He is a $3,000 receiver, though, in a pass-heavy, pass-focused attack with a high-end quarterback. He does have that going for him, if nothing else. Not great passing conditions, though. N'Keal Harry's on this team now. He saw 1 snap last week. He ran a route. That was about it. It's primarily TJ Hockenson in this offense for me. And then I'll mix and match through shares of the receivers. But I think I'm probably using Minnesota more in a bring-back sense against Justin Fields stacks than anything else. So if I have Fields plus more with Hockenson, I'm happy about that. If I have Fields plus Kmet with Addison or Osborne, I'm fine with that. Kind of the approach. Talked about the ground game. Yeah, nothing really to say there. So it's really two potentially good quarterback options with like kind of a clear-cut, limited options at the skill positions. It's easy to determine who the stack options are in this one. I just don't know that we get the game we want. I do like it for Justin Fields on his own, though. Ugh, my least favorite game on the entire slate. We can get in and out of this one quickly and pick up a little bit of time. I'll call it more than halfway through because a lot of the stuff I wanted to talk about we've already gone through. So I think we're going to pick up speed on the back half of this slate, gang. We're not doing too bad. 2 hours in. Spent a lot of time talking up at the top, too. Josh Gillum says, looking like 20-mile-an-hour winds, 30-mile-an-hour gusts. Is that a concern? Assuming you're talking about the Chicago game. Yeah, we've talked about it a couple times already since the top of the show, Josh. But definitely concerns in Chicago. Even more concerns also with 2 good defenses on either side in the Cleveland game, the San Francisco at Cleveland game. And then less weather concerns, a little bit more limited in terms of the rain and the wind in the Cincinnati game. But that could impact a game where we're expecting a lot of passing, looking for 2 high-end passing attacks. So the weather's a bit concerning. Could have an impact this week for sure. I'll tell you who probably won't have an impact this week. It's Mac Jones. Mac Jones working with Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, Hunter Henry, the corpse of Ramondre Stevenson, the corpse of Ezekiel Elliott. Whoever those other guys were that we were listing that they activated for this team. Apparently going to play a quarterback at wide receiver that they just signed this week. Kayshon Boutte might be involved. Who knows? Mike Gesicki might be involved. Who knows? It's not great. Not great if you're a Patriots fan. Demario Douglas is scratched. Got to cut him out. So I'll go through when I update the projections. Douglas will come out. We'll probably drop Boutte and maybe that other guy in, but not great. Stephen Leibowitz says, hey. Josh, no problem. Josh says, thanks. No problem, buddy. So anything that I want to go to in this game is primarily from the Vegas side. As I said before, the Patriots have been outscored by DJ Moore on his own over the last 3 weeks combined. Patriots 18 points total in the last 3 weeks. DJ Moore 30 points total in the last 3 weeks. Mac Jones, my note says, Mac Jones sucks. Hasn't finished a game since week 3. 4th lowest yards per pass attempt in the league. 12 of 22 for 110 yards and 2 interceptions last week. 12 of 21 for 150 and 2 interceptions the week before. In weeks 1 and 2, he was all right. 35 of 54 and 31 of 42. Week 1 was good. 316 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Week 2 was all right. 231 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Hasn't approached those numbers since. Jimmy G, the game manager on the other side, going to game manage his way through probably a win, but probably not a great fantasy game unless he and Devontae just completely go off. Last week, 22 of 31, 208 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Week 3, a good game, 324 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 3 interceptions kind of cuts into your score, 28 of 44. This is another one where I just prefer the skill players. I'll have plenty of Devontae, plenty of Josh Jacobs, and some Jacoby Myers as a good mix-in. I don't know how many of those come around a Jimmy Garoppolo stack, though. And we kind of did this already as I talked about it there at the top. But just looking at the rankings, 15th and 11th on DK for Jimmy, 20th and 18th for Mac. No improvement on the FanDuel slate. There's really nothing to sell here. 229 yards a game, 201 yards a game, 6 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, 5 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Fantasy quarterbacks, these are not. Premium fantasy running back, though. Jacobs is a volume beast. 54 snaps, 20 carries, 69 yards, and a touchdown. Also went 5 of 5 for another 20 yards in the receiving game. That was last week. 48 snaps, 17 carries in week 4. 56 snaps, 17 carries in week 3. Volume is significant. On average, plays 78% of the snaps, carries the ball 16 times, sees another 6 targets a game, 4.6 receptions a game. So essentially 20 touches a game all season. 21. Because I'm dumb and can't do that basic math. I mean, I can, but I just didn't look at it. Could have saved a half a second. Not exactly like breaking huge runs or anything like that. Only 2.9 yards per rush attempt, 1.5 yards before contact, 1.3 yards after contact. But just keep giving them the ball, plowing forward 3 yards at a time. That's what Jacobs is going to do, and he can catch the ball. Amir Abdullah really relegated to just some looks in the passing game. Not exactly involved enough for fantasy upside. And then kind of a split situation here between Ramondre and Zeke. Ramondre's just not playing well. Last week, 24 yards on 8 carries, 0 for 2 in the passing game. His high for rushing for this season is 59 yards on 19 carries in week 3. He's got 1 touchdown in 5 games. He's just not the same running back we saw last week. He's very cheap. He ranks 9th by point per dollar on DK because he only costs $5,400. 11th on FanDuel because he costs $6,200. If I'm going to anything from the Patriots, it's shares of Ramondre Stevenson. But I've gotten burnt on that like 3 times already this year. I don't know if I want to go back to it. Kind of painful. Rocket Sauce says, Terror, hi bud, go Phils. I agree, go Phillies. What a fun team. They've won me over. Much as I don't love rooting for Philadelphia teams. And honestly, that's primarily because of the Eagles. It's not like the Phillies are a Yankee rival. But yeah, that team, just fun. They come through, they're clutch, they hit like crazy. And what a party that looked like. I loved what's-his-face going around in the overalls with the beard thing on his head and everything. And my favorite part about the whole costume was not the empty beer box on his head or the bottle of booze in his hand or the overalls, the Super Mario look. It was the 2 pocket beers that he had in the pouch of his overalls. 2 pocket beers stashed for later. I loved that. But yeah, just a fun squad. I'm kind of won over to rooting for the Phils a little bit here. So yeah, go Phils. Stephen Leibowitz says, put some respect on Malik. That's the guy who's coming in for the Patriots, who's a quarterback and potentially getting some work as a wide receiver. To be fair, a lot of this is on the offensive line for the Pats. That has not changed, except the Raiders' D is not as good as Dallas and the Saints. Took Myers over 4.5 receptions. I like the Myers over 4.5 receptions part of it. I'll say that much. Zeke, 23 snaps, 8 carries, 21 yards last week. 4 of 4 for another 17 in the passing game. Has not scored a touchdown. Had a season high of 80 yards on 16 carries in week 3 against the Jets. And then was supposed to get, starters volume, and everybody panicked, and then that didn't happen. So, but yeah, I just don't love the poor play and split situation nature of this on a kind of bad team with a weak offensive line, as Steven was just pointing out. Not really my favorite spot. Trey says, do not embrace the dark side. Don't do it. You must resist. Boo, Philly. I don't know. That Sweet Siren song of a pretty fun-looking party in the locker room kind of won me over. In the passing game, Devontae's is obviously a absolute beast. Top player in the entire game. Only 4 of 4 last week. 45 yards. Bit of a clunker. Week before that, 8 of 13 for 75 yards. Going into that primetime game the last time out, I was saying, if you get a game like that last time where he only put up 75 yards, didn't score, maybe other things work out, yada, yada. And then he came out and didn't do much. I don't think it ended up mattering for us for whatever it was that I was talking about, but kind of limited the last 2 times. But before that, week 3, 13 of 20 for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. There's clear ceiling here. I don't think anybody's surprised to hear me say that. The price is high. 5th by points, but 25th by point per dollar on DK. 5th and 9th on the FanDuel slate. A little bit more affordable against FanDuel's cap than he is against DK's cap. But well worth getting to. If you've got the spare 81 hundo after you filled out the rest of a lineup and you just need a random wide receiver to put in, that's a pretty strong option. Myers, 60 plus snaps each of the last 2 weeks, 58 snaps in week 3. So he's out there a significant amount of the time, 40 plus routes each of those weeks. His targets have been 10, didn't play week 2, 12, 4 in a clunky week 4, and then 10 again last time out. Plenty of catches, 81 yards and 2 touchdowns, 85 yards, 0 touchdowns, 33 yards, 0 touchdowns was the bad one. And then 75 yards and a touchdown on the 7 of 10 last week. Very involved receiver in that passing attack. A capable guy who only cost $5,800 in an offense where the other receiver cost $81 on DK. 67 versus 83 on FanDuel. Talking about 15th ranked by raw points. That's not bad. It's not crazy far off Devontae. 18th by value outpaces Devontae on the DK slate. 12th by value closing in on him on the FanDuel slate. Both of those receivers are capable. It's just that I don't love the Jimmy G of it. Against a decent Patriots defense, too. I'll give them that. What are they? 7th, 5.9 yards per pass attempt. 190 yards a game, only allowed 5 touchdowns so far. Gaining pressure 23.5% of the time. They blitz like crazy, 45.3% blitz rate. Not that Jimmy's going to be, not that Jimmy's never seen a blitz before. But that's a decent amount of pressure, decent amount of blitzing. He's going to have to get the ball out of pretty quickly. Anyway, don't love this game. Said we were going to get through it quickly. Let's keep on going. Austin Hooper limited option, 36 snaps, 2 of 2 for 11 yards. His targets have been 1, 2, 0, 2, and 2. I think that's your expectation. 2 targets. If he happens to get one in the red zone, maybe you get the touchdown out of it, but hyper touchdown dependent. He has seen 0 targets in the red zone so far, so that's not all that encouraging for his touchdown upside. 12 targets in the red zone for Devontae, 7 for Jacoby Myers. That's where the ball's going. Ball's going to Devontae, Jacoby Myers, and Josh Jacobs in this offense, and not many other places. To the detriment of Hunter Renfrow, who we talked about in week 1 and kind of liked coming into the season. Last week, just 19 snaps. 1 catch on 2 targets for 7 yards. Week before, 2 of 4 for 12 yards on 30 snaps, 26 routes. Excuse me, that was week 3. Really limited opportunities. Tucker and Carter, 1 target each last week on 1 route each. Super limited. Michael Mayer, 42 snaps last week, 2 of 3 for 39 yards. 36 snaps, ran 13 routes, not targeted in week 4. Michael Mayer's targets have gone 0, 1, 1, 0, and 3. Again, not a high volume option. So it's really hyper specific where the ball's going with this team. It's going to these two guys and it's going to this guy. That's kind of why I like this a little bit better when I don't think that Jimmy G's a major asset at the quarterback position. I kind of like just drawing the skill players out of this one. Outside of those wild cards in that passing game, let's talk about the guys that we know are going to be on the field. Juju Smith-Schuster's out. Demario Douglas also out, so ignore him down here. Pop that on him. Devontae Parker, 2 of 4 for 20 yards last week. 2 of 4 for 33 yards the week before that. 2 of 3 for 19 yards the week before that. That's not a lot of production, gang. Kendrick Bourne ran 29 routes last week on 44 snaps. Targeted 5 times. He caught 2 of them for 43 yards. Not great. Not great at all. Parker does give you a decent point per dollar ranking because he only cost $3,500 on the DK slate. Even with this, I don't really like it. I don't trust Mac to really get him the ball that much. Thankfully, he doesn't rank out all that well on the FanDuel slate. I guess as a dart, you could certainly go there. For that cheap, there's potential. 10.9 yard ADOT, 15.3 yard ADOT for Bourne. He's operating a little bit more downfield, but Parker's downfield enough. 5 targets a game. 0.6 yards per route run last week. 1 yard per route run on the season. Not great, but since he's so cheap, I guess I have to put Devontae Parker at least in the mix on the DK slate. Hunter Henry 0 for 2 last week. 23 routes, 39 snaps. Limited. Gesicki actually targeted more. He caught 2 of 4 targets for 17 yards. Just 10 routes, though. 16 snaps. That was his snap low for Mike Gesicki last week, the 16. Previous weeks had been 32, 50, 31, and 33. And he ran 22, 35, 14, and 19 routes. So it was both a snap low and a routes low last week for Mike Gesicki. If he's out there really cheap, it's certainly no worse than Hunter Henry. And you get him for significantly less. He rates out better. If I'm going to a tight end from the New England offense, it's, again, very touchdown dependent. I don't hate the Gesicki over Hunter Henry. He's seen 1 red zone target. Henry's seen 2. To save a little bit of money, when you're talking about either one of these guys is just going to get a couple of targets and you've got to get in the end zone with him, take the cheaper, lower owned one who's seeing similar / more targets, running similar / more routes. It's easy enough. Stephen Leibowitz says playing the Patriots is a dart in your own eye. Hard to go with last week. Pat's stats as it was a garbage time when Zappy came in. Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, as I mentioned, Mac Jones has not finished a game since week 3. So, just not great options. It's an offense I just don't want to go to in a game that I don't really want to go to. And I have support for that from Vegas. 41 point total. 2.5 point line is good, but a 41 point total, I just don't need it. Minimal. I definitely get shares of Devontae, shares of Jacobs, and shares of Myers. Outside of that, I don't need all that much from the Vegas side. I might allow some Ramondre in around the edges. If I was on DK for 3,500, I think Parker would be involved. Everybody else is kind of maybe a little bit of Mike Gesicki as a dart throw value tight end on DK, but not a premium offense, not a strong option, not a priority. Houston, Nolans. I could see this one spinning up a little bit and going off for fantasy offense. Wouldn't totally surprise me. Capable quarterbacks. 42.5 point totals, not ideal, not great, but a 1.5 point spread. Vegas thinks it's going to be fairly close. Both teams can throw the ball. Even in a big Alvin Kamara week, you're probably still throwing the ball. He does a decent amount of damage through the air. Both teams play at a fast pace. Houston's been running the ball a little bit more over the last couple of weeks, but overall, both teams fast-paced. Both teams throw the ball a decent amount. So there could be some sneaky potential for this one to accelerate a little bit. Neither quarterback rates out great. 10th for CJ Stroud, 15th by value on DK, 16th and 12th for Derek Carr, 10th and 9th for Stroud on FanDuel, 17th and 11th for Derek Carr. Stroud picks up value just in throwing the ball 37 times a game. Carr only throwing it 30 times a game. He's also a little bit limited by that shoulder injury. But as I said earlier, he's looked better last week. Last week, 18 of 26 for 183 yards and 2 TDs. That's after going 23 of 37 for just 127 yards, with 13 of those passes completed to Alvin Kamara for only whatever it was, like 31 yards or something. 33 yards. So he was kind of hampered by that, Derek Carr. In the return last week where he had the 183 and 2 touchdowns, put up 7 yards per pass attempt and had 3 targets over 20 yards, which was similar to what he was doing before he got hurt. So I expect Derek Carr basically back on form, and he's got excellent skill players to work with. On the ground game for Houston, excuse me, I left CJ Stroud out of that mix a little bit. Stroud 5th by yards per pass attempt on the season, but going up against the pass defense that I just really don't like to target. This New Orleans pass defense has been pretty solid the last couple of seasons. Overall, New Orleans sits 4th by yards per pass attempt, 14th against the run as well in terms of yardage. Stroud, 20 of 35 last week for 249 and a touchdown, yet to throw an interception. 16 of 30 for 306 and 2 in week 4. 20 of 30 for 280 and 2 in week before that. 30 of 47 for 384 and 2 in the monster in week 2. 242 yards, 28 of 44 in week 1, no touchdowns. Been effective, though. Easily the best of the rookie quarterbacks. By far. I have no real issues with going to Stroud. I just have a bunch of quarterbacks ahead of him on the list of guys that I want to get to. So I think by the time I get to that point, I'm just going to be basically out of shares. But he's all right. Dameon Pierce, wasn't really enthused about him last week, but 20 carries, 66 yards. 1 for 1 in the passing game for 16 more yards in week 5. It's okay volume. Week before, 40 snaps, 24 carries, 81 yards. 1 of 2 for 27 yards in the passing game. The production's not great, but the volume's there. 2.9 yards per rush attempt, not good. 1 touchdown so far, not good. 1.4 yards before contact, 1.5 yards after contact, not great. Has broken 9 tackles. It's an improvement over whoever we were looking at earlier that had only broken 1 when we were talking about limited burst. 2.4 targets a game, 1.8 receptions. Just not producing a ton for the amount of times that they're putting the ball in his hands. Singletary and Boone, afterthoughts. Kendra Miller, Adam Prentice, afterthoughts. Alvin Kamara, obviously the go-to running back in this game. 7th on DK, 8th by value, 6th on both categories on FanDuel. Each of the first 2 games back, Kamara touched the ball 25 times. In week 4, it was 11 carries for 51 yards, and then that 14 targets, 13 catches, 33 yards in the passing game. It was limited in what he did with it, because he's obviously catching the ball on screens out of the backfield and behind the line of scrimmage a lot. But the fact that he saw all those targets was impressive. Week 5 last week, he came back 22 carries, 80 yards, put the ball in the end zone on the ground. Just 3 targets, caught all 3 of them, 17 yards. Way fewer targets, obviously. Ran 11 routes versus 31 the week before. Could just be a way they called the game for him. Limit the carries, give him some touches in the through the air that week. It was also the fact that Carr was limited and just needed somewhere to throw the ball that was kind of in close to him. So I think with a more normalized offense, we can see Kamara look more like he did last week, where he's getting 20-ish carries, 3 to 5, 7 at the outside probably targets. But a superstar caliber option. Ranks out really well on both sites, definitely in play. And then you've got premium options to go with him. Olave and Michael Thomas, two top-end receivers. Last week, Olave 2 of 5 on 32 routes, 56 snaps. Just 12 yards and a touchdown, but he did manage to score. Just 4 yards on 1 of 6 receiving, 34 routes on 49 snaps in week 4, but that was with the injured Carr. So we take that with a grain of salt. Weeks 1 through 3, he had 112, 86, and 104 yards in those games. 8 catches, 6 catches, 8 catches, 10 targets, 11 targets, 11 targets. was a volume monster for sure. Michael Thomas last week, 4 of 7 for 65. Week before that, 4 of 6 for 53. Basically, that's what he's doing every week. He's yet to go over 66 yards. He's got no touchdowns despite 5 red zone targets over the first 3 weeks of the season. 0 red zone targets each of the last 2 weeks. 31st by points, 26th by value on DK, 31st and 24th on FanDuel. It's not great. He's still priced up a little bit higher probably than he should be. I mean, these aren't high prices by any means. And especially not even, not high prices for the talent that we know he has had over time, for the volume that he's getting. It's not bad. It just doesn't come all the way through in projections. But 77% of the snaps on average, still seeing 8 targets a game, and all those opportunities in the red zone. At a certain point, that's going to translate to some scores. Rashid Shaheed, downfield option, 16.7 yard ADOT. All 3 of these guys operate down the field, 14.1, 10.7. That's another reason they were so limited when Carr couldn't throw the ball downfield in week 4. But Shaheed drawing 4 targets a game, 1.6 yards per route run. He's got 1 touchdown on the season, had a big 45-yard long. 2 looks in the red zone. More a downfield home run type threat in this offense, though. They're going to be without Juwan Johnson again at the tight end position. Foster Moreau had 1 target on 10 routes last week. Caught it for 6 yards and a touchdown. But I think anything you're doing at tight end here is just going to be very touchdown dependent. Jimmy Graham, 26 snaps last week, 8 routes run. Didn't catch his 1 target. No targets in week 4 on 21 routes. Moreau saw 2 targets in the red zone in the last 2 games, but he also had 2 did not plays. So, yeah. Taysom Hill fits in at the tight end position if you want him. Might run the ball, might throw the ball, might not do anything. Anything that he does probably will be pretty limited in his fantasy score. Probably going to be below this output and not much of a ceiling there. Joker, go lay down, buddy. We're almost done. So really, it's these 2 guys and a little bit of home run upside from Rashid Shaheed along with Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans offense. And then on the Houston side, they're going to be dealing without Tank Dell. He was listed out, then relisted as questionable. He's got a concussion. He's a prized rookie. It really, really seems like he's not going to play. The fact that he was out and then relisted, I think they're just playing games. I don't think he's going to be out there. Nico ranks 8th on DK by points, 4th by points per dollar. Robert Woods ranks 30th and 1st by points per dollar because he only cost $3,800. He was already seeing targets. He's also carrying a questionable tag, so there is that. But assuming he's out there, I think the targets support a pretty significant upside. 39 snaps last week, ran 23 routes, caught 3 of 9 targets, 30 yards. 3 of 6 for 26 yards the week before that, 3 of 6 for 34 the 2 weeks before that, 6 of 9 for 74 yards in week 2, 6 of 10 for 57 yards in week 1. He's yet to score, but they've targeted him 6 times in the red zone in 5 games or 4 games or whatever it's been. They have a bye? I forget. So they've been looking Robert Woods' direction. He's 11th by point per dollar on FanDuel. He's involved. I'm going to have some Robert Woods this week. I'm going to have him on his own. And any stacks that I build with CJ Stroud are probably going to have some Robert Woods in some of them. Nico's still the prime target, but I think Woods is going to pick up a decent amount of looks. 5 targets in the red zone to lead the team, or tie for the team lead with Dalton Schultz, the tight end, who I also think is an interesting option here. Last week, Schultz got targeted 10 times, caught 7 of them, 65 yards and a touchdown. 3 of 3 for 42 yards and a touchdown in week 4. He's had exactly 1 red zone target in every game they've played this year. 42 routes, 36, 18, 11, and 24, with 4, 7, 3, 3, and then that big 10 target week last week. He's involved every week, and the fact that they call his number at least once in the red zone every week is encouraging. For a tight end that nobody really is going to be thinking about that much, 11th on the board by points, 6th by point per dollar on DK for $3,600. There's value there. 12th and 11th on the FanDuel slate at $5,200. He's kind of a more mix and match option on the FanDuel slate. Interesting value tight end on the DK slate. John Mechie caught 2 of 2 for 20 yards on 17 routes last week. That was both his snap high and his route high, 26 snaps I expect he'll be out there a little bit, filling that role in. They also have Noah Brown. This is all assuming no Tank Dell as far as Brown and Mechie shares go. Noah was on the IR. He had an injured groin. He played week 1, 3 of 4 for 20 yards that week, 49 snaps, 37 routes. So he had a significant job that week. They didn't throw to him a whole hell of a lot. He didn't do very much with it. But the fact that he ran 37 routes and played 49 snaps that week, I kind of expect him to step more into the prime role than John Mechie. This will probably get reversed tonight. I think I'm going to give a little bit more of the love to Noah Brown. I didn't realize he had ran so many routes that first week. So we'll probably look that way. But both kind of limited down board options. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Rocket Sauce says, Tara, get that good bumper a treat as soon as you log off. Yeah, that's always the plan. We go directly out. We get some cookies and we go right out. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Shouldn't have said the C word. I don't think he heard us. But yeah, that's the move. He's probably got to go out. As I said, it's been raining all day, so he hasn't really gotten to go out and like check everything out, make sure all the grass is where he left it, all that stuff. Good boy. Let's see, we talked about Houston in terms of those guys. We talked about the New Orleans side. Yeah, so kind of straightforward as far as Nico goes, but I think Woods' potential to be a little bit sneaky. Dalton Schultz, most definitely a potential to be a little bit sneaky. And then assuming that no Tank, Noah Brown, another guy for 3,000 on DK. Obviously, we're not talking about a highly projected option. We're not talking about one that even ranks out well. But as a dart, with the idea that he's going to be out there playing a decent amount of the snaps, running some routes in a offense that's been somewhat effective, the only issue is for this team, they're going up against that New Orleans pass defense. That's pretty good. They're also really good against the tight end, by the way, so that cuts into the opportunity for Schultz as well. But I still like Schultz here. Keep this thing rolling. Only a handful of games to go. We're doing all right. He said 2 hours and 26 minutes into a show. Like I was saying, I like for the Friday show that we didn't do this week, I like Last First Look as a name. No idea what this show is named. We're kind of like the unnamed marathon breakdown show that you can watch split over the 2 days that you have before lock. Trying to end this one before 9 o'clock though for Lair. Lair gets a little fuzzy when we get out to 10 o'clock because he's waking up the crack of sunrise to go to work. Dedicated man that he is. Rocket Sauce. If you only play 3 or fewer lineups, that's way different than 10 plus. You guys are talking something there. Vic David points out Woods Q tag. Yeah, that's obviously important. We certainly want to make sure that he's out there. But if he's out there, I like the spot. I appreciate the note though, Vic. Mighty Scent says, thanks for your time. Amazing content. I can't believe you offer this for free. Hey, some of us aren't the smartest people in the world, you know? I'm glad you're enjoying it. I hope you succeed with it. I wish you the best of luck with it. There may be a paywall sometime in the future, maybe around when basketball season starts. We'll see. There's still going to always be a fair amount of free content, and there will always be a very low barrier to entry in terms of the price point when we get started. So don't sweat that. But yeah, for now, everything's free, and I appreciate you saying that you like it. Thanks. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Handful of people hanging out. I know a bunch of people picked this one up overnight, listen to it in the morning, so on and so forth. Oh no, Larry says, I don't think I'm catching up before the show's over. Still an hour behind. There's an OG fellow baseball nut. Happy I found him again. Keep grinding, says Rocket Sauce. Yeah, love me some baseball, buddy. Glad you found us too. Let's keep on going with this one. So a 41-point total. Philly going up against the Jets defense, 11th ranked, 6.1 yards per pass attempt, 25th against the run, 4.5 yards per rush attempt so far this season. As I said at the top of the show, I know Sauce is out, and I think that they're a little bit more dinged in terms of the yardage that they've allowed, just by virtue on how much they've been out there on the field all season. I do think it's a pretty capable defense overall, even without Sauce. Not a bad defense, but they are banged up, so we'll give them that. The Eagles are a very good team. That's why they're favored by 6.5 over the inept Jets. But I don't love the total here. I don't love how it's projecting. I mean, 19 points for Hurts is not bad by any means. But when we get into the point per dollar, it becomes a little bit ugly. DeAndre Swift, I think, is a very good option. Even if it is a limited passing attack, that could lead to DeAndre Swift upside. And against the Jets defense that's been giving it up in terms of the yardage on the ground, there's upside there. These two guys are star caliber wide receivers. This is a very good tight end. This is a sneaky option to mix in with Quez Watkins out. I think the Eagles are on the board. I'm going to have some. I'm going to force some because they're not going to come up all that often naturally for me. Given Hurts ranking 22nd by point per dollar, 12th on FanDuel is a lot more likely to come up. But he wasn't on that short list of QBs that came up in that a significant amount of the time in those sims that I ran. It's just a little bit because he's so expensive. But there's major upside, obviously. Any given slate, he's already run the ball in 4 times. They've got the brotherly shove on their side. He's a top 3 fantasy quarterback overall. He's 7th by yards per pass attempt. The Jets so far, we've talked about that already. 303 yards last week. 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Also ran the ball 15 times for 72 yards. Picked up a touchdown in week 5. Week 4, 319 yards, 2 touchdowns, 25 of 37. Carried the ball 9 times for 34 yards. Didn't score on the ground. But the 4 rushing touchdowns, 6 passing touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but tons and tons of scoring upside. I don't know if I rolled Jalen Hurts naked shares against these Jets. Probably like him better, Jalen +1. Jalen +1 with a Breece Hall bring back, I think is viable. Garrett Wilson, probably your only viable bring back receiver. I don't love the Jets as to keep pace in this one. Philly's defense is, I think, going to overwhelm Mr. Wilson here. Zach Wilson going up against the defense that blitzes 24% of the time, gains pressure 28% of the time, has 15 sacks on the season. They've allowed 11 touchdowns through the air. Wilson's got that going for him. 8.7 yard defensive A-dot allowed so far. But I don't know. It's Zach Wilson. I'm not a believer. He had the little mini breakout against Kansas City, the quote-unquote breakout. 245 yards, 2 touchdowns, 29 of 39. That's fine. 19 of 26 for 199, no touchdowns and an interception, 3 carries for 26 yards in week 5. It was a Breece Hall and the defense victory for the Jets. And that's really what I'm interested in on the Jets side. It's really Breece. He saw 32 snaps last week, 22 carries. That was his season high in carries by, season high in snaps by 10. 177 yards and a touchdown. 3 for 3 through the air for 17 more yards. His routes run have increased each week. 0 routes, 10, 11, 17, and then back to 10. So I guess not increased each week, but he's run a decent amount of routes. 2, 4, and 3 targets through the air. So he's involved in both aspects of the game. He's a really dynamic runner. Ranks 6th by DK points, 1st by point per dollar at the running back position, 7th and 2nd on the FanDuel slate. They came out before last week's game and said Breece is going to get the work, and Breece got the work. I see no reason to not believe that that's going to continue. Dalvin only saw 10 snaps, 6 carries, 23 yards, no targets, ran 4 routes, had a carry in the red zone. That's the concern, that Dalvin does potentially take away the touchdown, but it wasn't a problem last week. I don't see Breece really ceding too many carries to him, so it's the Breece Hall running back, the Breece Hall backfield at this point for me. Swift is the primary ball carrier. He's basically won that job over on the Eagles side. Similar situations as far as that goes. He went 17 carries for 70 yards last week. Didn't score, added another 38 yards on 6 of 6 through the air. Weeks 2 and 3, a couple of big ones. 28 carries for 175 yards and a touchdown, and 16 carries for 130 yards in week 3. Obviously, big-time ability. If the Jets are looking to bottle up the pass, shut down Jalen Hurts, lean into their pass D, and let the rushing game get what it gets, it could be a big day for DeAndre Swift. Out of everything on the Philly side, I kind of see the most explosive upside for DeAndre this week. Jalen's obviously the individual with the highest ceiling, but I kind of like the situation for DeAndre if I'm looking Eagles this week. Same thing on the other side. Like I said, Brees, my primary option there. In the passing game, starting with the Eagles, the more interesting side. A.J. Brown, 77 snaps last week, 6 catches on 8 targets, 127 yards. Didn't score. He's been over 100 receiving yards each of the last 3 weeks, 131, 175, 127. He had 9 targets in each of weeks 3 and 4 before 8 targets last week. Week 4, 2 touchdowns. Those are his only 2 of the season so far, but 10 targets, 6, 14, 13, and 8. Tons and tons of volume. It's A.J. Brown. Don't overthink it. 11th and 47th on DK because he costs $7,800. 9th and 22nd for $8,200 on FanDuel. If you don't like the pricing, you can look to Devonta. $7,000, still also expensive. Actually ranks 20th and 52nd, so maybe that doesn't help with the pricing. But still, tremendous upside for Devonta Smith. 73 snaps last week, 42 routes run. Just 1 of 5 for 6 yards. Kind of a mess. But the week before, 78 yards, 7 of 9. 28 yards on 4 of 5 in week 3. Scored in each of the first 2 games of the season. 47 yards and a touchdown and 131 yards and a touchdown. Significant upside for him as well as an individual in that passing attack. But again, I'm not really getting into the Eagles passing game just because of their 2 primary receivers don't rank great for point per dollar. Their quarterback doesn't rank great for point per dollar. Not that that's the do-all end-all by any means, especially not when you're talking about talents like these. But it does hurt in terms of how lineups come together. The other impact it could have, of course, is in public lineups. Difficult to get to, difficult to put together for hand builders, difficult to get to pop up to the to significant shares in optimizer builds, depending on where you have it projected, obviously. So I think there is, potential that this team goes a little bit under the radar, a little bit under-owned for what their ceiling is. Probably appropriately owned for where they project, but under-owned for their ceiling, if that makes sense. But still, again, not my top priority just because of how much they cost. So I'm kind of with the field a little bit on that. But if they go way under-owned, there's potential to grab a few additional shares. Dallas Goedert. Oh, I mentioned OZ. Olamide Zacchaeus. Back to third banana status because Quez Watkins is out again. Last week, Quez came back. 51 snaps, ran 28 routes. Got targeted 3 times. Caught 2 of them. And Zacchaeus dropped down to just 9 snaps, ran 6 routes, 0 for 0. In week 4, he ran 35 routes on 57 snaps, was targeted twice, caught 1 of them for 11 yards. Week 3, 43 snaps, 2 of 3 for 58 yards, but scored a touchdown. Say it with me, scored a touchdown. That's all we care about. That's all we care about when he costs 3,000. 21st by DK point per dollar. Actually outpaces the other 2 in points per dollar. 4,500 on the FanDuel slate, ranks him 40th by points per dollar, behind the other 2. Not to say that OZ is a better option than either of these guys by a wide margin. Dallas Goedert put up a touchdown in week 5, 117 yards, and targeted 9 times, caught 8 of them. Tons of snaps, tons of routes, tons of production over the last few years to support Dallas Goedert in this offense. Outside of that, the backup tight ends, no need to go there. Britton Covey, the primary return man. In week 4 with Quez out, he ran 5 routes, but wasn't targeted. Hasn't been targeted in the offense all season. He played 4 snaps and 6 snaps the 2 weeks that Quez was out. Britton Covey, not really an option. On the Jets side, you've got Garrett Wilson. He's just kind of limited by the quarterback he's got to play with, which sucks because he's a premium talent. But he drops to 27th by projections, 33rd by point per dollar, 28th and 34th on the FanDuel slate. He's still leading the team, 9 targets a game, 31.6% of the volume. putting up four receptions a game, two touchdowns on the season, 6.49 yards per target, a 10.3 yard ADOT. He's a great receiver. He's just totally hamstrung by having to play with Zach Wilson. 1.8 yards per route run last week, 1.7 on the season, 1.2 for Allen Lazard, 1.4 on the season. Wilson last week in week 5, 30 routes run on 52 snaps, 3 of 7 for 54 yards. The week before that, in Wilson's good game, or Zach Wilson's good game, 9 of 14 for 60 yards, 39 routes on 53 snaps. Week 3, 5 of 9 for 48 yards. This is not a primetime receiver when it's limited like that. They're looking his way, but the catches aren't extreme, the yardage isn't extreme, and it's all the quarterback's fault. 6,000, 6,900. Doesn't project great. Doesn't rank out well at all by point per dollar. Very limited, probably relegated to just run back duty against Philly, or maybe he falls into a few lineups. I expect he'll probably, since he doesn't rate well for me point per dollar, since probably with other site projections doesn't come out great point per dollar, might get a little under-owned for his talent. But again, it's just because it's just the quarterback, regardless of what his talent level is. If you can't throw the ball to him, or if you're limited in how well you can throw the ball to him, I don't love it. Lazard last week, 33 yards on 27 routes, 58 snaps, 3 of 4. Similar volume the week before that, 3 of 3 for 61 yards. His only touchdown of the season, his best game of the season in week 4. Super limited at this point of his career, at this point of working with this quarterback. Projects out okay, 48th and 27th on DK, 48th across the board on FanDuel. Not a lead option. Many receivers I like better. Tyler Conklin at the tight end position at least gets 5 targets a game. Last week ran 20 routes on 36 snaps at the tight end position. Saw 5 targets, caught 4 of them for 67 yards. Probably the second best receiving option on this team right now. Randall Cobb, his weekly targets have been 1, 1, 2, 4, and 1 in 5 weeks. Limited routes. His route run high was 28 in week 3. After that, it was 16 in week 4. Just not a lot of action downstream in the passing game here. So really it's number 1, number 2, and a very limited third option in a passing attack that we're really not looking to go to. I don't see any real need to stack Zach Wilson here. In those sims, in that top 10,000 lineups out of a million, he came up a handful of times. Not many. Do I still have my file open? I don't think I do. Nah, I don't have it open. I'm planning on putting some of those numbers from the sims, by the way. The guy said I could. The guys over at acemind.io, by the way, are friends of the site. I won't say our partners for sims or anything like that because we've got no official business relationship. I just like those guys. I think they made a nice little sim product. So our pals who have a good sim product, that's what we'll call them right now, acemind.io. I'm going to take some of those ROI results, some of the things I'm talking about as far as the sims go, and I'm going to drop them into the groups and stacks article tonight on when I do the Sunday update of that. So you have some of that information at your fingertips. Hopefully we get off some DK sims tonight, and we'll translate as much of that information to you guys as we can. Jets D, 2,800, 3,500. Project out all right. If you want to chase the idea that they limit Philly, you can go for it for a cheap price. Don't really love that option. Eagles defense on the other side projects out pretty decently, though. 3,800, 4,900. It's playable defense going up against. Anytime you're going up against Zach Wilson, you're a playable defense. I don't love throwing them against Breece Hall, especially with, they've been good against the run, though. 3.4 yards per attempt, fourth overall. So even with Breece, I'm not that worried about it. 3 to go. Wow, this is a good one. I think was this the last good one? Yeah, last good one. Buckle up. 2 ugly ones to finish with that San Fran and Cleveland game, and then the Washington-Atlanta game. But a good one before we get there. 45.5 points, 2.5 point spread. Gotta love that with 2 fairly pass-focused teams that have capable running backs and very, very good 1-2 options in the receiver core with a few playable downstream options. One very good quarterback and one effective a quarterback who is maybe better than we ever gave him credit for and came back to life last year and so on and so forth, and comes at a fairly decent price. This game's got a lot to offer. It does have rain. It does have a little bit of wind. There are concerns around that to potentially limit the upside for passing. You've got a stout Seattle defense that will hopefully encourage Cincinnati to go away from Joe Mixon and toward Jamar Chase, T. Higgins if he plays, Tyler Boyd, Trenton Irwin, Irv Smith, and limit the runs that they put up. But the 30th ranked rush defense, 5.3 yards per attempt, going up against Seattle, might encourage Seattle to run the ball a little bit more, which might grind some clock. We've really got to hope that Seattle's throwing the ball a lot to try and keep pace with Cincinnati. The best thing that could happen in this game is Cincinnati scoring on the opening drive. Best thing that could happen in this game. Just pedal to the metal from the get-go and see what we can extract from this. But if they are throwing the ball, I like our upside. Geno just 19th and 17th on both sites. Doesn't project out great, but I think he's a playable option. Given his receivers, given an idea that he might be throwing the ball a little bit this week, there's potential there. Week 4, just 13 of 20 for 110 yards and a touchdown. Twisted his knee, came out of the game, went back in, finished the game. No issues, not on the injury report or anything like that. So should be totally healthy. His top game this season, 32 of 41 for 328 yards and 2 touchdowns against Detroit in week 2. He's only thrown 1 interception. He's Geno. He's going to do Geno kind of things. Throwing the ball 30 times a game, completing 21 of them, 68%. 5 touchdowns on the season, just the 1 pick. 6.9 yards per pass attempt, 4.3 air yards per attempt, 6.2 intended air yards per attempt. He's outpacing Joe Burrow in his completed air yards per attempt so far because Burrow was so limited by that calf injury in being able to throw the ball downfield and being able to wait things out, let things develop in the pocket. That completely changed last week, fortunately. They looked like the old Cincinnati passing attack last week in that big breakout. Last week he came in, went 36 of 46, 317 yards, 3 touchdowns, all of them to Jamar Chase. 1 interception, ran the ball 4 times for 7 yards. Still not running the ball overly effectively, but I don't care. As long as he can throw the ball, as long as he can get it out downfield. Totally happy with that. So Burrow, no real issues there. Both of these guys, decent number of attempts throwing the ball in the red zone. They do both have running backs that will get touches in the red zone. But overall, these teams like to throw the ball. Joe Mixon, for his part, last week, 25 carries for 81 yards. That's pretty significant volume. 4 catches on 4 targets for 13 additional yards. In week 4, he saw 14 carries, 67 yards, 1 of 1 in the pass game for an additional 9. He's involved in the passing game, runs more routes than he gains targets, but he's out there running routes, and his target shares have been 5, 5, 2, 1, and 4. Definitely involvement on both sides of the ball for Joe Mixon, or both sides of the offensive game for Joe Mixon. Both sides of the ball. He's not out there playing D. 77% of the snaps last week. The only really involved running back. We're not going to Evans. We're not going to Trayvon Williams here. 2.2 yards before contact, 1.7 yards after. 3 red zone targets in the passing game, 3.4 targets a game. Plenty of involvement. Kenny Walker on the other side for Seattle. Very strong option at running back. 17 carries last week, 79 yards, a touchdown. Not targeted, didn't run any routes, or might have just come up with a 0 in that funky game log board that I was using. But either way, it wasn't targeted in the passing game last week. The last time out, that was week 4. I think they were on a bye last week. Week 3, 18 carries, 35 snaps, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns. Has 5 total touchdowns rushing on the season and over the last 3 games. Targeted 3 times on 10 routes in week 3, 2 times on 16 routes in week 2. So minimal, limited-ish involvement in the passing game, but definitely an option in the rush game. Zach Charbonnet kind of fallen by the wayside. Kid that they spent the draft pick on. 30% of the snaps on average last week. They were on a bye last week. 5.2 carries a game, just 26 yards. Does put up 5 yards per rush attempt. So maybe at a certain point in the season, they start feeding him the ball a little bit more. But I think right now it seems like they're kind of happy with the guy they already had before they spent the draft pick on Charbonnet, which is kind of a weird way to go about things. But depth is king at the running back position, as we know. Jamar, big breakout last week, 3 touchdowns. Ranked second by points on both sites, ninth by DK value, fifth by FanDuel value. He's Jamar Chase. Another guy that we just don't overthink it. 8,300, fine. 9,300, fine. Want to raise his price? Fine. Go ahead. Don't care. 15 of 19 targets last week. Caught 15 of 19. 192 yards, 3 touchdowns. 61 routes run on 74 snaps. In week 4, he ran 40 routes on 48 snaps. Caught 7 of 9 targets for 73 yards. That was with a limited Burrow. Week 3, 141 yards, no touchdowns on 12 of 15 with a limited Burrow. 39 and 31 yards in weeks 1 and 2 on 5 catches each with an even more limited Joe Burrow. But yeah, was a lurking monster going into last week. Had the huge game. It's going to be popular this week, no doubt about it. But he's the go-to receiving option here. T. Higgins was questionable, is questionable this week, missed last week. In week 2, he had 2 touchdowns and 89 yards on 8 catches, 12 targets. 2 catches and 20... More limited with just 2 catches and 21 than 9. The last 2 times out, 2 catches each game, 21 and 19 yards. But obviously banged up. If he plays, I think we can go to T. Higgins for 6,400 on the DK slate, 7,000 on the FanDuel slate. If nothing else, you're getting him at a discount. Overall for the season, 8 targets a game, 17% of the volume. Targeted 5 times in the red zone. That's a high-end receiver option for a pretty fair price. Tyler Boyd, I don't know that he's necessarily the next man up. He's going to be out there. He's always out there. Even when T's healthy, he's out there. But last week with T out, he saw 7 targets on 42 routes run on 59 snaps. Trenton Irwin played 1 more snap. He played 60. He saw 8 targets. He saw 10 targets. Caught 8 of them, 60 yards. Didn't get into the end zone, but he did see a target in the red zone. I don't know. I think Trenton Irwin, if T. Higgins doesn't play, Trenton Irwin might sneakily be the better option than Tyler Boyd, just on volume, on opportunity. Boyd's going to get his regular looks. He plays 82% of the snaps on average. Irwin's the guy that got the big uptick. He went from 43% on average to 76% last week. Ran routes on 58% of those, and he was targeted on 29% of the routes that he ran. Boyd only was targeted on 18% of the routes that he ran. The season numbers don't matter because Irwin's not a regular. But if he gets that extended role again, I don't mind that. Andre Isivas, who we also mentioned going into last week's game. Not a significant role, but he played 24 snaps with the offense. He ran 12 routes. He was targeted twice. Only caught 1 of them, only for 9 yards. That was his highest workload and his only targets all season. He's a special teamer. But if you get that situation again, if he gets my 2 targets for 3,000 on DK, I could throw a dart at that. It's probably just 1 dart in 150 lineups and a bunch of Cincinnati stacks. But there's a dart to be thrown there. It's probably going to miss the board, get stuck in the wall, get you kicked out of the bar. But there's a dart to be thrown there. 1-1A situation on the Seattle side. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. 2 premium receivers, though. I like both of those guys. I've won with both of those guys in the past. Metcalf, last time out in week 4, 3 of 4 for 34 yards and a touchdown on 36 snaps. 6 of 8 for 112 on 32 routes and 52 snaps in week 3. Had a touchdown in week 1, touchdown in week 4. Red zone targets, 3 of 4 weeks, 3 of 4 games played. 1, 2, 0, and 1 in the red zone. Tyler Lockett, 36 snaps in week 4, 4 of 6 for 54 yards. Didn't score, but had two touchdowns in week 2 on 8 of 10 for 59 yards. Overall, in terms of volume for the season, that's the wrong guys. 6 targets a game for DK, 7 targets a game for Tyler Lockett, and then you're getting 5 targets a game for Jackson Smith and Jigba, but he's only putting up that only comes on a 3.2 yard ADOT. That is not getting you down the field. That's not getting you the yardage that you need for fantasy production. 3 catches on 6 targets last week for 5 total yards. Little safety valve type option. 1.6% of the air yards. Noah Fant, Will Dissly at the tight end position, kind of mix and match type options. Fant, 2 of 2 for 63 yards, had that one big play down the sideline in the Giants game. Targets have gone 0, 4, 5, and 2 on 13, 17, 18, and an undetermined number of routes in those games. I think Fant is the preferred tight end over Dissly or Parkinson. Cody Thompson, Jake Bobo, I don't think we're really chasing here. Jake Bobo saw 20 snaps in week 4, targeted once, 13 routes, targeted twice for 5 yards, but a touchdown on 29 snaps in week 3. That's how we got to Jake Bobo in that showdown slate in week 4. And then he didn't really do very much with it, but he was out there for some snaps, targeted once. It's an extreme dart throw. That's a bigger dart throw than Andre Iosivas, assuming T. Higgins doesn't play. If T. Higgins is in, that's Jake Bobo's probably a better dart throw than Andre Iosivas. Neither one of them is likely to score any fantasy points at all. I would really, really limit the number of times that I would put either one of these guys into a lineup. But if we're looking for 1 or 2 targets with some downfield opportunity, that's all I got to say about that. 2 games ago, talked about this one a number of times already this show. Fortunately, pretty limited on the Cleveland side as far as what we have to talk about at all. Less so on San Francisco because they've got some very relevant skill players. And a good quarterback. We're going to be hearing about that. It's unfair, I think, that I root against Brock Purdy to become a successful quarterback just because I don't want to spend the next 10 years of NFL watching, hearing about how he was taken with the last pick in the draft and then turned into the next Tom Brady, so on and so forth. It's enough already. He's been good. He's no arguing with it. He's 252 yards and 4 touchdowns in week 5. That's pretty damn good. 17 to 24. 220 yards and 2 touchdowns before that. 206 yards, 0 touchdowns. 310 with 2. 283 with 1. Hasn't thrown a pick. 9 touchdown passes in 5 games. Yeah, he's good. He's got Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield and as a receiving option. He's got Debo as a receiving option and out of the backfield. He's got Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle as receiving options. Eli Mitchell might not end up playing. He's banged up, questionable tag. If he doesn't go, we probably end up with, what's his face? It'll come to me. Or maybe it won't. What the hell's the kid's name? Did I not put him in here? I swear I put him in these notes. Jordan Mason, there he is. I put him in the Eli Mitchell note. The only thing I wrote about Elijah Mitchell was Q tag. Jordan Mason gets the looks if not. And then I put all of the Mason note in Eli Mitchell's spot because I'm a genius. Last week, Mason, 18 snaps, 10 carries, put up 69 yards and scored a touchdown. Not uninvolved. That was in a week in which McCaffrey saw 48 snaps, carried the ball 19 times for 51 yards and a touchdown. Had another 27 yards in the passing game. 2 of 3 in the passing game. It's kind of a limited output, but McCaffrey got in the end zone. It's all, at the end of the day, that's what we're really looking for. But it was a more limited game overall for McCaffrey last time out. In week 4 against Arizona, 45 snaps, 20 carries, 106 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Added another 7 catches on 8 targets for 71 yards and a 4th touchdown in the passing game. He has at least 1 rushing touchdown in every game they've played this year. Just the lone receiving touchdown. But at least 1 rush touchdown in every game they've played. That's significant enough. It's only a 5-game sample, but a lot of rushing touchdowns. He's Christian McCaffrey. He's expensive. He's worthwhile. I realized I've been talking through this without clicking through the position by position of it all. So that was Brock Purdy and Christian Walker. To rewind a little bit, Christian McCaffrey rather. PJ Walker cost $4,000 on the DK slate. Even with a 10-point projection, that puts him 16th by value. I can't do anything about that. 22nd by value for 6,100 on the FanDuel board. The only quarterback, again, in FanDuel sims that did not land in any of those top 10,000 lineups across a million sims. Or across a million lineups that were created via the sims. That said, on the DK board, if I had run those same sims for DK, at that price, I would have to think he's come up a few times. Not a top priority by any means, even at the price, but there's a little bit of value there. PJ, last year, his best game in the limited action that he had, 19 of 36 for 317 yards, a touchdown and an interception at Atlanta. Or it was, depending on whether you prefer yardage or touchdowns, 16 of 22 performance against Tampa Bay for 177 and 2 touchdowns. Hasn't played this year. Again, the only quarterback to miss that top 10,000. Not a good option. Even on DK for 4,000, there's probably going to be some quarterbacks that outpace him on points per dollar. We talked about McCaff. We talked about that side of the rush game. On the Cleveland side of the running equation, Jerome Ford, going to see more of the carries. 40 snaps last week, 9 carries for 26 yards. Week 4, 5 of 6 for 19 yards in the passing game. 18 yards and a touchdown in week 3 on 10 carries, 37 snaps. Kareem Hunt is here. 14 snaps each of his 2 games back, 5 carries each game, 13 yards and 12 yards each game. Ran 5 routes the first game back, 8 routes the second game, 2 of 3 for 22 the first time, 0 targets the second time. Jerome Ford's backfield, just not really doing a ton with it. Projects out all right. Doesn't cost you much. Not a great option, though. With the idea that they're probably not going to be throwing the ball very much, that the conditions suck. It's going to be rainy. It's going to be windy. They're going up against a San Fran defense that ranks 9th with 3.7 yards per rush attempt and 3rd with 5 yards allowed per pass attempt. I expect these running backs are going to touch the ball a fair amount of the time. I just don't think they're going to produce very much. McCaffrey's really the only running back to go to here. In the pass game, everybody on this side of the ball is going to be limited by the quarterback they're playing with. And really, Amari Cooper's the only one that I would want all that much anyway. Cooper, 1 of 6 for 16 yards last time out. The week before that, in week 3, 116 yards and a touchdown on 7 of 8. That was a much better, more Amari Cooper kind of a week. This week, playing with the quarterback, it's really, really limited. Conditions, defense, and quarterback situation, it just stacks up against Amari Cooper too high. I just don't want to go there. Elijah Moore, 2 of 4 for 20 yards last week on 54 snaps. Had a carry for 20 yards. Has at least 1 carry each week of the season. His big week was a 49-yard week where he went 9 catches for 9 on 9 targets in week 3. Hasn't scored a touchdown. Is their second best receiving option. 7.7 yard ADOT. Cooper's the downfield guy, 16.6. Not a lot to love about this passing game. Again, against a good D in bad conditions. David Njoku played with burns on his face and hands last time out. 44 snaps, caught 6 of 7 targets, 46 yards. He's also not scored through the air this year. Donovan Peoples-Jones, Marquise Goodwin. Goodwin saw 4 snaps last week, caught 1 of 1 for 0 yards, first catch of the season. He's seen 10, 13, 5, and 4 snaps. Not a lot of action here. On the other side of the game, it's a lot more interesting. Debo, 48 snaps, went 3 of 5 for 55 yards, added 5 carries for 30 yards last time out. That was 15 routes on 48 snaps. In week 4, 19 routes run, but picked up 0 targets, had 3 carries for 6 yards. That was a limited week 4. But that was the week that McCaff went off like crazy and had 4 touchdowns. In week 3, Debo had 6 catches on 12 targets, 129 yards and a touchdown against the Giants. His targets have gone 7, 9, 12, 0, and 3. His carries have been 2, 5, 1, 3, and 5. He's involved both in the passing attack and the rushing attack. He's got 1 receiving touchdown, 1 rushing touchdown on the season so far. Obviously a super skilled guy. Does a lot of the same things that McCaffrey does for 6,100 on DK, 7,200 on FanDuel versus 9,500 and 10,3. I'm not saying he's McCaffrey. He's not going to have the same volume. He's not going to have the same role. Skills-wise, they do a lot of things similarly. This is a nice discount to get on a player like this. It's just, again, in this game, the conditions are going to suck. And San Francisco is going up against the Cleveland D that ranks 2nd in both categories. 3.2 yards per rush attempt, 4.7 yards per pass attempt. So there's that working against them. But I really like Debo. I really like Brandon Ayuk. Had the big week 1, 8 of 8 for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns week 1. Last week, 4 of 7 for 58 yards, didn't score. 6 of 6 for 148 yards, didn't score in week 4. Didn't play in week 3, limited output in week 2. But a very high-end capable receiver who projects well. Only cost 6,200, 7,700 across sites. 21st and 31st on DK, 18th and 33rd on FanDuel. Not the greatest point per dollar investment, but a good option in that offense if you're determined to go to shares of Brock Purdy. George Kittle's the same thing. A little bit expensive on the DK slate. I mean, 5,000 in a raw sense, not expensive, but in a points per dollar, that lands him 9th at the tight end position. Tight end's just fairly cheap over on DK. 5,900 on the FanDuel slate puts him 4th by value. That's a lot better. 4th overall by points on both sites. Kittle's been a premium tight end for several seasons now. 5 targets a game. 3 touchdowns already on the year. Last week, 3 touchdowns. 3 of 4 for 67 yards. 52 snaps. An absolute beast any given week of the season. Juwan Jennings, limited in terms of the targets. Overall, his targets have been 1, 3, 3, and 1. Didn't play week 4. 14, 12, 17, and 7 routes. Not a ton of action, but probably the next man in behind these guys. But you're dealing with McCaffrey, Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle all get their looks before anything goes to Juwan Jennings. Ray, primary return man, got involved a little bit last time out, but very limited and going to see probably a reduced role with everybody here. Bell, Dwelly, nothing to work with down board. So this one, again, for me, I expect San Francisco to probably underperform where the industry's got them. I've got them a little bit behind across the board. Point or two here, point or two there. But I expect an underperformance by San Francisco on the back of the Cleveland defense and the weather and the bad conditions. I expect Cleveland to be Cleveland on offense, but I expect a good game from them on defense. I think you can go to the San Francisco D. They project out with a skill player projection, by the way. They're very high priced, but they're well worth it on both sites. They're going to be popular, but going up against PJ Walker and this fairly inept already anyway offense, bad conditions, anything can happen, kind of ugly game. San Francisco D is definitely in play. The Cleveland D is the wild card. They project out kind of okay. They're not expensive. They're easy enough to get to. They're good on their own. They're playing in the same conditions. They're just up against a team with all those great skill players. So they're the lower end of the two defenses, but that's why they're half the price of the San Francisco defense on both sides. Or, well, half the price on DK, a little bit more. 2/3 the price on FanDuel. Rocket Sauce says, Walker definitely in the mix. Interesting. You're talking about PJ Walker? I think you're talking about Kenny Walker. I think you're responding to what Larry said. Because Larry said Geno plus Walker plus DK or Lockett. Which I like. I like that a lot. Rocket Sauce says, first thought is to fade CMC. Makes me think most others will too, so maybe he's a must-have. I think when we're dealing with a super high-priced guy, even with as much talent as that, when we're not talking about, well, he's really good and he's in a great situation, but he's going to be popular, so I'm going to fade. I don't think necessarily, like we're talking about, and again, not full fade by any means. I just plan to be a little under the field on CMC. And if he's super low owned, I do agree. In tournaments, you can go over the top on that and get more than the field of him. But that direct line of thought is what I would maybe quibble with a little bit there, because the reasoning behind us and what we're talking about, and maybe other sites are talking about and other people in the public are thinking about, the reasoning behind undercutting CMC is not because of the popularity in an explosive spot. It's because the spot sucks, right? So there's a difference there. When we're talking about getting away from a play because it's really good but highly owned, then you can make that argument, oh, if it goes under where we expect it, then it becomes a much better play. Whereas this one, limited by defense, limited by a lot of mouths to feed for one thing in that offense, but also a very good D on the other side and very bad conditions overall in this game. Those things stack up a little bit more where it's not necessarily saying, all right, yeah, it's going to be low, so go to it. If that makes sense. Hopefully that made sense. It felt like a clunky explanation, but hopefully it made sense. Not disagreeing with you. And definitely if Christian McCaffrey comes into this game owned 3% of the time by the public, load up. It's still Christian McCaffrey. So yes to a degree, but just with the slight correction to the line of thinking, I think. Last game up, Washington, Atlanta. We made it, gang. 3 hours and 9 minutes. Still not the marathon 4 hours that we did that first week, fortunately. Hopefully this one fits into Larry's schedule. Hopefully Larry can get the rest of the show. I know he's still listening an hour or so behind. What's up, Larry? Hopefully you can get this one in and listen to everything before the slate locks tomorrow. Plenty of time still to do that. All right, so we talked about this one up at the top. I really don't like either of the quarterbacks all that much. Both teams are fairly plodding, fairly low in terms of pace, fairly low level in terms of pass rates. They've got two good running backs in this game, Brian Robinson and Bijan Robinson. Atlanta, 8th against the pass, 5.9 yards per pass attempt. 12th against the run, 3.8 yards per rush attempt. The defense on the other side, a lot more of a sieve in both aspects of the game. 4.8 yards per rush attempt, ranks 27th. 7.5 yards per pass attempt, ranks 28th. I think that maybe spells upside for Bijan Robinson. Projects out fairly well. Major disappointment for us last time out, obviously. 46 snaps, 14 carries, just 46 yards in that spot where he was projecting like a monster, like a great spot. But he sees plenty of volume. 10 carries, 19, 10, 14, 14. 6, 5, 6, 5, and 2 targets over his 5 weeks. And is obviously a highly dynamic, very, very skilled running back that we want to get to. He ranks out 9th on both sites by points, 17th by point per dollar because he costs 7,200 on DK against the lower relative cap, 9th by point per dollar for 76 on the FanDuel slate. 61% of the snaps last week, 71% on average. He does have Tyler Algier there to steal carries from him. Bijan's carrying the ball 13.4 times a game. Algier's carrying it 12.4. If Bijan was seeing half of these snaps on these carries on top of what he's getting, potentially that could be huge. He's putting up 5.4 yards per rush attempt. Give him the damn ball. Hasn't scored on the ground yet. Algier's run it in twice. Last week, Algier did pick up with Bijan kind of struggling. Algier bounced back to 17 carries, put up 40 yards, just one target. But that's a little bit of a concern, a little bit of a blip. Might have just been because Bijan wasn't really looking great. But Algier's carries went 15, 16 in the first 2 weeks, dropped to 7 in weeks 3 and 4, and then bounced back up to 17 last week. So a little bit of concern that he steals the touchdown, a little bit of concern that he steals a few too many carries. But Bijan's still the go-to option, the star there. At 46.57, knowing that it's a probably touchdown-dependent play, if you're getting 17 carries, obviously you can go there. If they told me we're going to give him the ball 10 times for this price, depending on where those 10 carries came on the field, I might invest in that. But if we knew we were getting 17 carries for these prices, that's pretty good. I don't know that. It's touchdown dependent, but I think you could throw a few darts at it if you wanted to. Brian Robinson on the other side, 6 carries for 10 yards, 4 of 4 for 33 yards in the passing game. But they dropped down. They were losing by 3 scores pretty early in the game. So they were really pass focused the last time out. I skipped over the quarterbacks. That's how much I don't like these quarterbacks. I just skipped right over them. So they were throwing the ball a ton that last time out. Sam Howell went 37 of 51 that week for 388 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception. Just kind of volume based against Chicago because they went out and that was the game where Fields put up a big couple of quick scores. So they were playing from behind, flinging the ball all over the field. 29 of 41 for 290 yards and 1 touchdown at Philadelphia the week before. He's got some ability. He's not a bad quarterback, but he's not really a go-to. I do like the receivers that he's got to work with. McLaurin and Dotson in particular. And then Des Ridder, for what he's worth, 28 of 37 for 329 and a touchdown last week. Bit of a step forward. His yardage output the 4 weeks before that, 115, 237, 201, and 191. No game with more than 1 touchdown pass on the season. I don't know. I don't really love it. Even against kind of a soft D. Ha ha ha. I heard it. Even against a middling pass defense. I don't love it. Really don't want to get too invested in either one of these quarterbacks. 6 touchdowns with 6 picks for Howell. 4 touchdowns, 3 picks for Des Ridder on the season. They each run a little bit. 2 rushing touchdowns for Ridder, 1 for Howell. There are better options at the quarterback position. There are better options for stacking. I just kind of want to maybe take some Bijan shares. Maybe some Brian Robinson shares as an individual skill player. And then Drake London, Kyle Pitts as individuals. And maybe McLaurin and Dotson. And maybe even some Curtis Samuel as individuals. I don't know how much I stack this one. In the passing game, this is where I ran out of time with putting my notes together on where all the individual targets game by game have gone. Last game, I made it most of the way. But overall, London and Pitts both drawing 6 targets a game. Where are we? London scored twice. Pitts has yet to score this season, but 6 targets a game. 3.5 yards per route run last week for last time out for Kyle Pitts. 44% target share on his 63% routes on 53% of the snaps. So basically, he played half the snaps, ran routes 63% of the time, and was targeted on 44% of those routes. 20.8% target share on the season. Again, basically just splitting the primary receiving duties with Drake London. London, actually both of them, fairly decent downfield operators. 10.4 yard ADOT for London, 11.7 for Kyle Pitts. Jonnu Smith has been biting into the target share of Kyle Pitts at the tight end position recently. 5 targets a game, limited output overall, but he's getting some looks in the passing attack. That's kind of concerning. Mac Hollins drawing 4 targets a game. And then Van Jefferson now joining this team, coming from Los Angeles because they had just too many mouths to feed. He was a 17.6 yard ADOT, 3 targets a game in his, 3 games with Los Angeles this year? 4 games? 5 games? Whatever it's been. But was really only featured in a couple of those. He's kind of a home run threat, downfield home run type play. And I don't know how often he's going to be involved in this passing attack at all. Obviously, doesn't project out well. Touchdown dependent for either one of these guys as downfield options. I think all these guys end up doing is just chewing into each other's shares, if anything. So you might get the home run play from either one of them. They're both downfield guys. But you might get 0 targets for either of them. Not a great option. Terry McLaurin, John Dotson, Curtis Samuel. Solid little 3-headed monster of passing targets here. And Logan Thomas is actually a pretty decent option at the tight end position. But these guys play the lion's share of the snaps. They see most of the targets in this offense. 6 a game for each of McLaurin and Dotson, 5 a game for Samuel. McLaurin gets downfield. Dotson and Samuel operate more underneath. Samuel out of the slot. Logan Thomas drawing 6 targets a game for him. 6.8 yard ADOT. He's scored twice this season. Each of the receivers has scored once. In terms of red zone, they're spreading the ball out a decent amount across these 3 guys in the red zone. McLaurin in 5 games yet to be targeted in the red zone. That's annoying. So he's out there running decoy routes in the red zone while these guys are getting all the targets. But they're getting the targets. Cole Turner. Did I just see 4 red zone targets for Cole Turner? Nothing like finishing the show up on a Cole Turner note. Turner caught 1 of 1 targets last week. Played 10 snaps on offense, 5 with special teams. He ran 8 routes. Yeah, he was targeted not last week, but in week 3 he was targeted 3 times in the red zone. Week 2 he's targeted once in the red zone. That week 3 game, he caught 4 of 7 targets on 21 routes run. That was the week that Logan Thomas missed, I think, which would explain it. The fact that they looked his way that often in the red zone that week, though, kind of surprising. Yeah, that was the week Logan Thomas didn't play. So those targets probably go in Logan Thomas's direction. But just the idea that, they put him out there and they threw the ball in his direction. If you're hunting around for a $2,500 tight end, that's still probably not your option, honestly. Very, very limited upside there. So this one becomes, I think, again, just, skill players. Yes to these 3 guys. Yes to those 2. Yes to him. Yes to him. and kind of knows on the quarterbacks. So this is one where I'll just take my skill player shares where they fall. Low priority game. Backed up by Vegas. Low priority game. And that, gang, is it. Stacks board one last time. Miami. Monster opportunity. High priced. Monster opportunity. Doesn't impact their value ratings. I mean, it does a little bit, but. Jayville. I'm going to be going down with the Jacksonville ship, or I'm going to be celebrating a pretty nice week, depending on the performance of Trevor Lawrence and his pals. But definitely going to be invested in that one. These two guys, with a pretty big chunk of those lineups, were the top two in those sims that I was talking about. Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa a week. If it's not those two, Stafford, Burrow were the next two guys in there. And then down here to Joshua Dobbs because of the value. A lot of value there. 4th ranked on DK, 1st ranked points, or vice versa. 4th ranked on FanDuel, 1st ranked on DK, points per dollar. 15th overall by scoring. Not saying they're going to go out and light the world on fire, but if they do, it'll come at a great price. High priority teams through those 4. This one I don't love. They still rank out fine, but I just don't love the conditions. I don't love the defensive nature, the slugfest nature of that game. Vegas, I like their side, but more for just individual skill players. New England, I don't like at all. Tampa Bay and Detroit, I think we can get involved with. They project out all right. Philly, I'm definitely going to have. I'm going to get involved. Top 10 team overall in terms of points. Not great by point per dollar. Don't love the matchup against a still decent Jets D. But definitely going to have, just because too skilled not to. I don't want to see the Jalen Hurts week and then have none of them. Doesn't make any sense. Houston and New Orleans, I think you can extract skill players on both sides. Seattle and Cincinnati, I definitely want to have involvement. Cincinnati with a high priority stack. And then I definitely want to stack some Seattle as well. A lot of run backs for sure from Seattle, but I'll have some Geno and his receivers type of stacks. It's probably the cut point. Outside of my Dobbs shares here, and probably some field shares there. This is like the quality cut point, I think. Who we sacrifice? Houston, but they're going up against a really good New Orleans pass D. So this is my least favorite week so far for that Houston pass attack. I think that's it. I think this is like your quality cut point. Take your Arizona shares and your field shares, and then anything else from down here is kind of more skilled players. What else do we have to talk about, guys? 3 hours and 21 minutes in. 24 people still hanging out. You guys absolutely rock. Coming up on 9 p.m. when we started at 5:30. Glad we started early for Larry out there. But let's see what else we got to do overnight tonight. We're going to get the groups and stacks article completely updated. Going to run a couple million sims. Going to run a couple thousand lineups. Get all my thoughts documented. Any boost recommendations, removals, all that stuff from the groups and the stacks. Going to go through, make sure all the projections are updated, make any tweaks, changes, removals that we need to make. Going to write the above below column. That thing's been hitting pretty hard. We're going like 70%ers on, it's the belows go below, the aboves go above. Like 3 out of 4 of them each week have been hitting. That column's been doing pretty well. What else are we going to get? Everything will be updated. Projections, rankings, all that stuff will be updated. Discord will be live. I'll be in Discord all night. I'll be here sitting at this desk working in front of this computer all night. So if you pop a message into Discord, I'll talk to you. I don't know if I'll be in there just talking to myself, clacking away on the keyboard. Stephen Leibowitz stacking Verlander and Maldonado. Verlander over 5Ks. Ask me tomorrow. Probably. That's a good line. I'd say probably, but ask me tomorrow. Jump into the Discord and remind me. I'll spin up projections for that tomorrow. What else, guys? Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Follow at rotoscouts over on X. Over on Twitter. Re-X those X's when they come out. When they come across your field of view. Hit the little re-X there. Hit the little heart button. I hear the heart button's got fire on it now. Ooh, Elon's making big changes. Way to invest $40 billion so that you can put fire on the heart emoji. Good job, asshole. Anyway, with a little shot across Elon Musk's bow, I think that's going to be it. I think I'm going to bow out for the rest of the evening. Got a lot of work to do, and we're coming up on 3.5 hours, and I've said all I need to say about this slate, except for good luck out there. Somebody go win something. I'll see you guys probably Monday. I'll be around, but I'll probably see you Monday. Adios.